from black water to black plastic. Divers break the surface, gasping, hands hooked into swollen trash bags that should have stayed on the ocean floor. Cut to a table of open liners, limbs and torsos laid out under fluorescent light, while the word butcher hangs in the air. Smashed to Frank Lundy, motionless, eyes locked on a wooden box filled with meat. Glinting blood slides that do not belong in an air conditioner. Over that, we still hear Dexter's voice in our heads. Calm, clinical, the practice psychology of a man who believes every plan has a contingency, every urge has a code, every investigation can be steered if he just stays 3 steps ahead. But the images are already arguing back. The Bay Harbor Butcher case map thickening with pins. The FBI grid of currents and dump sites closing around Miami like a noose. Let's kick things off by cutting straight between 3 moments that should have ended everything. Lundy's fingers hovering over those slides, Dokes locked in that stinking shipping container, eyes burning through Dexter's mask. Leela's face lit by fire in the Everglades as the cabin erupts. The explosion swallowing the only proof Dexter wasn't the butcher. Different locations, different episodes, same trajectory, control on paper, collapse on screen. The discovery of the slides is supposed to be impossible. Dexter hides them in his apartment, in an air conditioner no one should ever open. Yet, we watch the box in evidence gloves. We watch Lundy's mind connect trophies to M.O. Investigation to colleague. Dexter tells himself he can redirect suspicion. He plants evidence, he nudges behavior, cut immediately to Dokes stalking him, refusing to accept the convenient narrative, trusting instinct over forensics. How many times can Dexter patch one leak by punching a hole somewhere else? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the big twists we remember, but on the rhythm of failure baked into Season 2. Dexter frames Dokes to protect the code, then has to physically cage him in the Everglades. He cages Dokes, and that draws Leela. Leela arrives, and suddenly the frame job needs a body, a fire, a spectacle. Every fix escalates. Every solution recruits a new accomplice, a new potential witness, a new person who has to be lied to or eliminated. In this video, we're going to live inside that escalation. Along the way, we'll keep flashing back to these 3 pressure points. The slides that should have convicted him, the container that should have exposed him, the explosion that should have condemned him. We end the cold open on Dexter, alone, on his boat at night, the city a distant glow, the water around him pure black. No bodies this time, just a man who thinks the worst is over, framed against an ocean that has already given up his secrets. Season 2 is the 12-episode crash test, where that mask should have shattered for good. So how did he sail away? Season 2 answers that question by attacking the one thing Dexter believes is untouchable, his control. He tells us he's methodical, precise, always 3 moves ahead. But every major beat this season exists to prove the opposite. The blood slides in his air conditioner, Dokes at his back, the FBI's dump grid tightening around Miami Bay. Each image is a crack in the mirror of the master predator he thinks he is. In this video, we're going to sit right in that gap between Dexter's self-image and the actual investigation unfolding around him. On one side, we have the fantasy, a man guided by a perfect code, engineering every plan down to the last drop of blood. On the other, we have the reality of Season 2. Every safeguard he trusts either fails outright or backfires into a new, bigger problem. This is not a story of control. It's a season-long case study in failure that somehow doesn't quite kill him. Let's kick things off with the core thesis. Season 2 is not about a genius predator gracefully evading capture. It's about a man whose double life is defined by failed plans that miraculously don't end in immediate collapse. Dexter hides his trophies in what he thinks is an untraceable spot, and they get pulled from his AC unit. He plans to frame the Bay Harbor Butcher as an abstract monster, and the role lands on the one person who actually sees him, Dokes. He decides Narcotics Anonymous will be a harmless cover story, and it hands Leela a direct line into his psychology and his secrets. To keep this clear, we're going to reframe Season 2 as a rewatch experience. Once you know Dexter walks away and Dokes dies in that Everglades cabin, every earlier scene plays like a countdown to the moment his cover should logically implode. Lundy's task force mapping ocean currents. Deb connecting the Bay Harbor Butcher to Miami Metro. Dokes staring at Dexter like the evidence is already written on his face. How many times can a plan misfire before the world finally catches up? The focus is not just on who Dexter kills or which clue surfaces next, but on the architecture of his plans, what he intends, what he overlooks, and where reality punches through. Stalk the target, control the evidence, maintain the mask. Season 2 keeps taking those 3 steps and short-circuiting them. The shipping container where Dexter tries and fails to kill Dokes, the cabin where Leela erases the only proof of Dexter's innocence by committing an even bigger crime. Each major section will track that trajectory, from design to collapse. By the end, we may see Dexter less as a mastermind and more as a man constantly rescued by other people's blind spots, obsessions, and bad choices. Dokes' isolation, Lundy's trust in the profile, Leela's fixation on Dexter as her dark project. Along the way, Season 2 stops looking like a triumph of the code and starts reading as a near-miss tragedy he doesn't truly earn surviving. So when we say Season 2 stops looking like a triumph and starts reading as a near-miss tragedy, we're not just talking about the body count. We're talking about the machinery behind every close call. The plans, the stories, the way Dexter tries to steer perception, emotion, and evidence all at once, and how often that control almost snaps. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on who Dexter kills, but on the complete systems he builds around each move. A plan for Dexter isn't only a plastic-wrapped room and a syringe. It's a cover story for Rita, a plausible mood for Deb to read at breakfast, a forensic explanation that will satisfy Masuka, and a psychological posture he can maintain under Lundy's questions. One lie for Miami Metro, one lie for his family, one lie for himself. When any piece slips, the whole structure starts to tilt. In this video, we're going to treat each Season 2 crisis as a case study in that tilt. The blood slides discovered in his air conditioner. The shipping container where he fails to kill Dokes. Leela following the thread of his NA cover story until she's standing inside his darkest secret. For every one of those, we'll map 3 beats: what Dexter thought would happen, the safeguards he trusted, and the precise instant reality veers off his storyboard. Where does the fantasy end and the investigation begin? Along the way. We'll keep tagging a few recurring dynamics that quietly drive these failures. Dexter's overconfidence in his read of people, assuming Dokes is just a hothead, that Rita will accept any half-truth, that Leela is safely contained by his boundaries. His hunger for connection, which turns NA meetings and late-night confessions into leverage other people can use. And his chronic underestimation of everyone else's intelligence, from the FBI analysts charting his ocean dump grid to Deb connecting emotional dots he never anticipates. He thinks he's the only one gaming the board. Season 2 keeps proving otherwise. Each major section will also track consequences, not as single explosions, but as shockwaves. A misstep with Dokes doesn't just endanger one confrontation in the Everglades, it warps the entire Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, isolates Deb, and hands Leela a narrative she can weaponize. One night with Leela doesn't just threaten Dexter's relationship with Rita, it creates an arsonist who will literally burn away the only physical proof of his innocence. How many times can a double life absorb that kind of impact before it collapses? That's the central question under everything we're about to unpack. Not how does Dexter get away with it, but how does this specific failure bend the season's emotional and investigative trajectory? From here, we move scene by scene through Season 2's biggest ruptures, starting with a stolen box of glass slides that should have ended Dexter Morgan right there. So before we chase those blood slides out of the air conditioner, we need a map. Season 2 looks chaotic on the surface, but underneath, almost every close call falls into 3 pressure points: operational, relational, and existential failure. To keep this clear, we're going to use those as our recurring lenses for the rest of the breakdown. Operational failures are the mechanical breakdowns, the logistics. Evidence, surveillance, patterns Dexter thinks he's hidden. When those blood slides end up in his act vent, that's not fate, that's an operational crack in his system of control. Same with the FBI's ocean dump grid, methodically matching current patterns to a single body disposal zone Dexter has been using for years. Or the shipping container in the Everglades, where his plan to kill Dokes quietly miscalculates everything from timing to terrain. These are moments where the investigation doesn't just get lucky, it starts reading Dexter's rituals back to him. Relational failures are different. They're about people who should be cover becoming exposure. Dexter's Narcotics Anonymous story is a perfect example. On paper, it's the ideal shield, a public explanation for secretive behavior, late nights, emotional distance. In practice, it hands Leela psychological leverage and gives Rita and Deb a new script to interrogate him with. His dynamic with Dokes is another relational vector. Dokes doesn't need proof. His instinct reads Dexter's mask as predatory from day one. And every confrontation escalates the scrutiny. By the time Dexter is literally locking Dokes in that container, the relationship itself is the evidence. And then there's Leela, the sponsor who becomes an arsonist co-conspirator, turning his cover story into a direct path toward exposure. Existential failures run deeper. These are the moments where Dexter's internal mythology, Harry's code, the fantasy of being a necessary monster, the belief that he can channel his urges without collateral, starts to collapse under real-world consequences. When he sees the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation built from his own trophies, he's forced to confront the idea that Harry's system didn't make him safe. It made him legible. When Leela saves him by killing Dokes, it shatters the illusion that his code contains the damage. How do you tell yourself you're preventing chaos when your survival requires innocent people to die? In this video, we're going to tag every major Season 2 crisis across these 3 categories. Each major section will zoom in on one event, the slide discovery, the task force's body dump grid, the Dokes captivity, the cabin explosion, and ask, what failed operationally, what snapped relationally, and what cracked existentially inside Dexter's own psychology. Along the way, we'll watch those failures stack, overlap, and accelerate until his continued freedom feels less like brilliance and more like a terrifying cosmic glitch. From here, let's kick things off with the simplest category to track, the operational failures that should have ended the Bay Harbor Butcher before Episode 3. From here, we're staying inside Season 2 and moving in a straight line. No jumping around, no hindsight shortcuts. We're going episode by episode through the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, but only stopping when Dexter's double life realistically should have collapsed under its own weight. To keep this clear, we're not recapping every kill room or every quirky side case. The focus is not just on what happens, but on the specific beats where the plan, the cover, and the psychology all line up for a potential implosion. If an event doesn't materially threaten Dexter's cover, it lives in the background, only stepping forward when it amplifies the pressure on the main fault lines. So what actually makes the cut? First, the blood slides. We'll track the moment that little wooden box leaves Dexter's control, lands in an air conditioner, and suddenly turns into the purest form of evidence the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force could ever dream of. From there, we stay locked on Dokes, his instincts, his confrontations, his surveillance. And eventually, his captivity in that shipping container, where every second Dexter keeps him alive, is another second his story should be ending. Along the way, we're weaving in Leela as an accelerating threat, not just an eccentric artist. Each major section will follow her, from NA sponsor to arsonist to full-blown saboteur. The way she uncovers Dexter's secret, manipulates his lies, and finally burns down the Everglades cabin that holds the truth about Dokes. Around that, we'll keep the FBI task force in constant view, especially their body dump grid, current analysis, and forensic trail that keeps brushing right up against Dexter's lab coat without quite naming him. In this video, we're going to treat Dexter's relationships as part of the investigation. That means tracking how the NA cover story with Leela, the breakup and reconciliation with Rita, and Deb's own trauma and career stakes all tighten the net. Every time Dexter lies to protect the code, we'll ask, what failed operationally, what fractured relationally, and what cracked existentially inside his sense of control. Structurally, each major plan gets broken down the same way. Intention. What Dexter believes will keep him safe. Safeguards, the rituals, alibis, and backup stories he trusts. Breaking point. The exact frame where reality stops cooperating. Fallout. The consequences that ripple forward through the rest of the season, warping the trajectory of the Bay Harbor Butcher case and everyone orbiting it. By the time we reach that Everglades cabin, the goal is simple. We should be able to pause on a single shot and say, this is where Dexter Morgan's story should have ended. Not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet, procedural arrest that the show itself keeps swerving around. The question is, how many times do we hit that moment before the cabin even explodes? So when does that quiet, procedural arrest feel closest? Not at the cabin, not with Dokes in chains. It starts here, when the ocean itself spits Dexter's secret back onto the surface. We're on that Coast Guard boat, choppy water, divers disappearing into the dark. Then one of them breaks the surface, hauling up a torn black trash bag that doesn't look heavy until it does. Another follows, then another. Soon, the deck is lined with slick plastic, split seams, pale limbs, and torsos spilling out like the contents of a nightmare dumpster. In seconds, Dexter's private sacrament, wrap, wait, drop, forget, turns into a floating mass grave with cameras rolling and federal agencies on speed dial. To keep this clear, Dexter believes he has a plan. A clean logistical system that gives him control. Deep water, strong Gulf Stream currents, a precise dump site only he knows, far enough offshore that no casual fisherman will ever snag a souvenir. The code says, be careful. Dexter upgrades that into an engineering problem he thinks he's solved. Depth, distance, secrecy, stalk the target. Prepare the kill room. Feed the ocean. No evidence. Then, one environmental shift, a change in current patterns, storm activity, and seabed erosion the show barely has to explain, turns that confidence into pure fantasy. Those bags don't dissolve instantly. They drift, they rise, they tear. What Dexter treated as a bottomless trash can is revealed as a conveyor belt, slowly returning everything he's dumped to the coastline. The central question isn't, how did he get away with this for so long? It's, How did he ever think this wouldn't happen? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this dynamic, operational failure that detonates into relational and existential pressure. The moment those bags hit the deck, Miami Metro isn't just working a new investigation, they're exhuming Dexter's career. Every torso is a case file he falsified. Every face is a night he thought was safely buried. He has to stand there as Masuka cracks jokes, as Lundy maps out dump grids and current models, as Deb looks at the handiwork of the man she loves without realizing it. Watch his response. Outwardly, he's the helpful blood guy, offering neutral observations, trying to stay detached. Inwardly, we see the first real static in his psychology. The darting eyes, the micro pauses, the realization that each body is a breadcrumb, specific tools, specific ligatures, specific cut patterns, all converging on a single invisible author. How long until someone in that room follows the trail? Along the way, Season 2 stops being about Dexter maintaining a double life and shifts into something harsher. From this point on, the system has already failed. The ocean dump is compromised, the pattern is public, and survival becomes less about keeping the mask straight and more about outrunning the consequences of a collapse that's already in motion. The moment those trash bags come up and the cameras start rolling, Dexter's private ritual gets dragged into daylight branding. Overnight, the anonymous killer in the currents becomes a headline, the Bay Harbor Butcher. Talk shows debate his psychology, radio hosts crack nervous jokes, and every cop in Miami Metro walks past that task force board like it's a mirror they don't want to look into. Dexter's pattern is no longer a secret. It's a story. Inside the bullpen, we watch the language harden. At first, it's the body dump case, those Ocean Vic files. Then Lundy arrives, and with him, a narrative. He gives the press a name, a shape, a trajectory. The Bay Harbor Butcher isn't just a murderer. He's a serial archetype, complete with victim profile and forensic signature. Each pin on the map, each reconstructed cut mark, turns Dexter's fantasy of surgical control into something trackable, discussable, and most importantly, investigable. This is where the investigation stops being a puzzle Dexter can solve alone at night. Lundy brings interagency cooperation, FBI resources, and a methodical calm that Dexter can't intimidate or outmaneuver with a single clever move. Stock the evidence. Cross-check the labs. Build the grid. Lundy's plan is the anti-Dexter plan, slow, collective, and designed to survive individual failure. Even if Dexter misdirects one person, there are 10 more analysts, agents, and techs comparing notes behind his back. Dexter misreads that structure completely. He assumes he can steer things from the inside, that his role as blood spatter analyst gives him home field advantage. To keep this clear, his whole strategy rests on a single belief, that everyone else will think like a lone protagonist, following one line of reasoning at a time. But the task force is a network. One agent questions the current patterns, while another refines the victimology, and someone like Masuka double-checks lab anomalies. How do you gaslight a hive mind? That's the central question of Season 2's collapse. The more organized the hunt becomes, the more Dexter has to fracture himself to keep up. He's no longer just lying to Rita about late nights or to Deb about his emotional life. He's falsifying reports, shading conclusions, and actively sabotaging the professional identity that was supposed to protect him. Every time he stands in front of that board and coolly explains the butcher's psychology, he's performing a kind of self-cross-examination. One wrong inflection, and the mask cracks. The focus is not just on the task force as an external threat, but on what it forces Dexter to do internally. Compartmentalize harder. Split his time between killing, covering old kills, and managing the narrative of the investigation itself. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern, the system he trusted to hide him becoming the engine that exposes him. Because the creation of this task force doesn't end with a nickname and a press conference. It sets off the exact chain of procedures that will lead straight to the discovery of his blood slides. Dexter thinks he's watching the board. He never realizes the board is already watching him, piece by piece, until one tiny trophy box turns the whole plan radioactive. That tiny trophy box doesn't just turn radioactive in the abstract. It immediately locks onto one person whose instincts have been screaming the truth since season 1, James Dokes. From the first time he calls Dexter a freak in the bullpen to the last time he stares him down through cage bars, Dokes is the one variable Dexter can't smooth over, can't outthink, can't charm. Let's kick things off by going back to those early confrontations. Dokes watching Dexter at a crime scene, not the body. Dokes clocking the way Dexter lingers over blood spatter a little too long. Dokes stepping into his space and saying what everyone else only feels, "You creep me out." There's no investigation yet, no Bay Harbor butcher profile on the board. What Dokes has is pure behavioral pattern recognition, micro-expressions, emotional flatlines, the psychology of a predator hiding in plain sight. To keep this clear, Dokes is uniquely dangerous because he collapses Dexter's two main defenses at once. First, the resume. That military and special forces background means he's seen real monsters, not TV versions. And Dexter's stillness reads as threat, not quirk. Second, the social camouflage. Dokes is immune to the office charm offensive. Rita's softness, Deb's loyalty, Masuka's deflection, none of it moves him. His moral code is brutally simple. If something is wrong, you push until it breaks, and you don't care how many rules you bend on the way. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. Dexter assumes he can manage people the same way he manages evidence. With Dokes, the plan is basic. Avoid direct conflict. Deflect with jokes and fake awkwardness. Let Dokes' temper and disciplinary record discredit him, so that when he finally makes an accusation, it sounds like another outburst. Dexter believes that if he stays bland enough, the system will work in his favor. But once the Bay Harbor butcher investigation heats up, that calculation fails. The blood slides give the task force a profile. They give Dokes a target. Suddenly, every hallway interaction becomes a micro-risk. Dokes lurking at the lab door. Dokes following Dexter to the marina. Dokes catching him at the cabin in the Everglades. He turns into a living lie detector embedded in Dexter's daily life, constantly stress-testing the mask Harry's code taught him to wear. How do you maintain control when the threat isn't a serial killer you can stalk, but a coworker who never stops watching? The focus is not just on Dokes' suspicion, but on how narrow Dexter's margin for error really is. The moment physical evidence appears, slides, boat records, missing time, Dokes' instincts stop being a vague accusation and start being a prosecutable case. And when those instincts finally collide with hard proof, trapped together in that cage in the swamp, we see the central question of the season snap into place. If Dexter can't outplay this one man, what desperate, irreversible move will he make to keep the entire double life from collapsing? And Dexter's answer to pressure is not to slow down, not to reduce variables, but to invent an entirely new cover story. When the Bay Harbor butcher investigation starts tightening and Rita corners him about his absences, he doesn't recalibrate the plan. He doubles it. He tells everyone he's an addict. On paper, Narcotics Anonymous is elegant. It explains the late nights, the secrecy, the mood swings. It gives Rita a narrative that feels emotionally truthful without being literally true. Dexter is a man wrestling with a hidden compulsion. It gives Deb a reason to back off her questions, because who wants to pry into someone's recovery? To keep this clear, he's building a shield that works precisely because it aligns with his psychology, just mislabeled. It's not a dark passenger. It's a drug habit. Enter Leela. At first, she's not a threat. She's infrastructure. As his NA sponsor, she becomes the human extension of the alibi, someone who can vouch for his meetings, his relapses, his disappearances. When Rita calls, Leela can say, "Yes, he was here." When Deb worries, Leela can say, "He's working the steps." The focus is not just on Dexter lying, but on him outsourcing the maintenance of that lie to a volatile stranger he barely knows. And that's the miscalculation. Dexter assumes this is a controlled variable. He thinks he can manage Leela the way he manages a crime scene: limited access, clear boundaries, no overlap with the kill rooms. But Leela doesn't operate on his code or his sense of control. She's impulsive, boundaryless, and instantly fascinated by the darkness she senses in him. The central question he never asks is simple. What happens when your alibi has needs of her own? Watch how fast the relational fallout begins. Rita, already bruised from Paul's addiction, hears NA sponsor and immediately feels the threat. Why is this intense, artistic woman the one who understands Dexter now? Deb, still raw from Brian and the ice truck killer, is curious, then suspicious. She knows what it looks like when Dexter hides behind a relationship. And Leela? She accelerates from sponsor to confessor to emotional arsonist in a handful of episodes, pushing him to embrace his true self, encouraging reckless honesty, escalating intimacy. Here's the pattern interrupt. For the first time this season, Dexter builds a plan that fails before the investigation even touches it. The NA story doesn't just patch a hole, it tears open new ones. Every time he leans on Leela to cover a disappearance, he deepens her attachment. Every time he lets her into his emotional life, she gets closer to the operational one. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this move, because this is a relational failure already mutating into something bigger. The sponsor who was supposed to shield him will eventually hold evidence, set fires, and stand one revelation away from his real secret. And once Leela crosses that line, the Bay Harbor Butcher case stops being just an external investigation and becomes a private war inside Dexter's own carefully constructed life. By the time Leela turns into an arsonist with a crush, Dexter's life is already smoldering. But the real inferno starts in the most boring way possible, building maintenance. Let's kick things off with Attic Unit. No chase, no kill room, just a couple of guys doing routine work in Dexter's apartment, unscrewing a vent he thought no one would ever touch. Metal scraping, panel sliding out, and then there it is. The little wooden box we've watched him open like a religious ritual, now sitting in the open air, in someone else's hands. In a single cut, the most private object in the series becomes public property. This is the central question of Season 2's operational collapse. How does a man obsessed with control lose everything to an HVAC check? The blood slides are damning on every level. They're not random souvenirs. They're a catalog. Each slide is a preserved drop from a kill, perfectly matching the Bay Harbor Butcher's forensic signature, clean cuts, specific victims, methodical pattern. And they aren't in some anonymous storage unit. They're hidden in the ceiling of a Miami Metro blood spatter analyst's apartment. A cop's home. A long-term archive of murder sitting above the air filter. To keep this clear, we have to go back to why the box exists at all. Dexter's original logic for keeping trophies is all psychology and ritual. The slides give him a sense of control over the chaos of killing. Memory he can revisit on command. A ritual that turns each murder into a repeatable, almost scientific process. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Take a drop of blood. File it away. That sequence feels like order to him. But in practice, the ritual manufactures exactly what any investigation dreams of: a portable, labeled evidence set that maps out his entire killing trajectory. Once the box leaves the wall, the system actually works. Chain of custody clicks into place. The workers find it, the police respond, forensics test the samples, and the slides move from odd discovery to centerpiece of the Bay Harbor butcher case. Along the way, Lundy's task force does what Dexter always feared someone might do. They connect the trophies to the dump sites, to the missing criminals, to a single, consistent MO. The focus is not just on the bodies in the ocean anymore, but on the mind that needed to keep a piece of each one. And yet, in the most bitter twist of this whole season, the evidence doesn't land where it should. Instead of pointing inward at the quiet analyst whose apartment hid the archive, those same slides are about to be rerouted toward the one man who already suspects the truth. The box that should end Dexter becomes the weapon that will frame Dokes. And that redirect is the next catastrophic failure we have to unpack. So when that little wooden box of blood slides moves from Dexter's air conditioner to an evidence bag, we watch a perfect investigative trail point to the wrong man. The trophies match the Bay Harbor butcher's ritual exactly. They're found in Dexter's apartment. Yet within an episode, the investigation has reframed the hunter as the monster. To keep this clear, we have to walk through the logic Miami Metro and the FBI use. On paper, Dokes fits a certain story. He's the aggressive sergeant with a history in special forces, a record of violence, a habit of disappearing on black ops. He's been openly hostile to Dexter, tailing him, confronting him at crime scenes, even getting suspended over his obsession. When those slides surface, the task force sees proximity and motive. Dokes had access to Dexter's place. Dokes hated Dexter. Dokes has the training to pull off these kills. The leap is irrational, but it feels emotionally tidy. Meanwhile, Dexter's plan has been to cultivate the opposite image. Mild, helpful, forgettable, the quiet lab tech who brings coffee, runs blood work, and gives Deb pep talks about the case that is literally about him. That performance pays off here. The central question the FBI should be asking is, why are the butcher's signature trophies sitting in the forensic analyst's apartment? Instead, they ask, who would want to frame this nice, socially awkward blood guy? From a psychology standpoint, this is institutional confirmation bias in real time. Once Dokes is tagged as the weird, violent one, every ambiguous data point bends toward his guilt. His missing time becomes secret kill windows. His military past becomes a training montage for murder. His decision to confront Dexter alone in that cabin becomes proof he was on the run, not evidence he was right. Even the fact that he's been shouting about Dexter for an entire season is flipped into motive. Of course, the killer would project onto an innocent coworker. And Dexter just watches it happen. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these moments where his survival feels less like control and more like a trap closing in slow motion. His reaction here is a mix of relief and horror. Relief, because the heat is finally off him. Horror, because Harry's code never included, let an innocent man wear your sins. The focus is not just on whether he gets away, but on what getting away costs. This is a grotesque operational success. The investigation collapses around a narrative that protects Dexter. But relationally and existentially, it's a failure of the highest order. He survives by allowing the one man who truly saw him, the one person whose instincts pierced the mask, to become the face of his crimes. Each major section will show a version of this trade, but here it's at its purest. Freedom, bought with a scapegoat's life. And the really chilling part? We haven't even reached the moment when that framing turns lethal yet. And the really chilling part is that Dexter looks at that trade and still believes the way out is more control, more planning. So when we move from the police station to the shipping yard, we're watching a man double down on the exact psychology that almost exposed him. Let's kick things off with the image: rows of steel containers under sodium lights, cranes groaning in the distance, and Dexter stalking dokes between metal corridors like it's just another hunt. In his head, this is elegant. Lure dokes, sedate him, slice of plastic, a knife, an ocean dump. One clean kill to close the loop on the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation and restore the illusion that the code still works. To keep this clear, Dexter thinks he has safeguards at every level. Isolated location, far from Miami Metro. Tools pre-packed, kill ritual rehearsed. A narrative ready to go. Dokes fled, dokes snapped, dokes ran from the heat. The plan assumes a compliant target, a predictable pattern. Dokes follows. Dokes confronts. Dokes dies. Simple, controlled, contained. But Dokes is the one variable Dexter can't script. He doesn't freeze on the plastic. He fights. He reads Dexter's movements, counters the syringe, forces a hand-to-hand struggle in a space Dexter thought he owned. In seconds, the triadic rhythm of stalk, restrain, dispose collapses into something Dexter has never really trained for. A conscious opponent who knows him, hates him, and won't stop talking. The central question becomes, what do you do when your perfect kill turns into a hostage situation? Dexter improvises, and that improvisation is the real failure. Instead of a body he can vanish, he locks Dokes in a remote cabin, chained and bleeding, surrounded by plastic and tools that scream premeditation. Now the witness is alive. Now the container is traceable. Now the plan depends on time, not precision. This is an operational disaster, hiding inside a temporary success. Tactically, Dexter has neutralized Dokes. Strategically, he's created a ticking bomb. Dokes knows the code. He's heard the justifications. He's seen the knives, the slides, the entire trajectory of Dexter's secret life laid out in a single room. If anyone stumbles on that cabin, the investigation doesn't just catch up to Dexter. It leapfrogs years of suspicion in one night. Along the way, the safeguards reveal themselves as liabilities. The isolated location, also an obvious dump site to revisit in a missing cop case. The prepared tools, physical evidence tying the Bay Harbor Butcher to a single searchable structure. Even the lock on the door becomes symbolic. Every hour it holds, Dexter's double life survives. Every rattle of that chain is a reminder that one broken hinge, one curious hunter, one wrong turn on a dirt road would end the series in season 2. From this point on, every hour Doak stays alive in that cabin is another hour Dexter's entire identity hangs by a single lock and a lie. And the really unnerving part is that the next failure won't come from the police at all. And the really unnerving part is that the next failure won't come from the police at all. It's already chained to the floor of that Everglades cabin, watching Dexter's control decay in real time. We move from the shipping container to the remote cabin like it's an upgrade. New location, deeper isolation, fewer eyes. On paper, this is Dexter revising the plan, trying to stabilize a situation that has already spun beyond his grasp. In practice, he's just moving the ticking bomb farther from town and convincing himself the silence means safety. Dokes is that bomb. Locked up but lucid. He doesn't just know Dexter kills. He knows the ritual, the code, the psychology. He pushes on every visit, the slides, the dismemberment, the ocean dumps, the way Harry groomed him. He's not a helpless captive. He's an active transmitter, rehearsing exactly what he'll tell Deb, LaGuardia, the FBI, anyone, the second a door opens or a chain breaks. How do you keep a double life intact when the one man who sees you clearly is sitting there, cataloging your crimes? To keep this clear, Dexter tells himself a story. He's not imprisoning an innocent man. He's gathering proof that Dokes is the Bay Harbor butcher. He's not panicking. He's buying time until the investigation points cleanly away from him. But every drive to that cabin is another trail of cell pings and GPS data, another chance for surveillance to catch his trajectory heading nowhere near Miami Metro or home. Each major section will later show Dexter as methodical, but here, the method is the problem. The repetition itself becomes evidence. Inside the cabin, the operational failures stack up. Plastic wrap, tools, food supplies, Dexter's fingerprints on every surface, a single warrant, a single search team following a bad lead, and this place flips from hidden sanctuary to forensic goldmine. Outside the cabin, the absence is louder. Dokes vanishes. His badge stops pinging. His family and LaGuardia start pushing back against the narrative that he's a ghost or a fugitive. How long can a decorated sergeant just disappear before the entire investigation tears up the map? And remember, Dexter isn't the only wild card in play. Leela is circling his NA story. The FBI is tightening the Bay Harbor butcher grid. Deb is watching her brother unravel. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this cabin because it's where Season 2 stops being a mystery and becomes a countdown. Dexter isn't preventing exposure anymore. He's delaying an almost guaranteed detonation, gambling that everyone else's failures will arrive before his own finally catch up. The central question from here on out isn't will he be caught, but who gets blown up when the cabin, metaphorically or literally, finally goes up in flames. So when we say the season turns into a countdown, Leela is the wild card we keep pretending isn't holding the detonator. While Miami Metro builds an investigation around blood slides and body dumps, she's building something more dangerous, a private mythology of Dexter that makes his darkness not a problem to solve, but a treasure to protect. Let's kick things off with those boundary violations that, in any sane world, would have set off alarms. Leela shows up uninvited at Dexter's work. She drifts into his apartment. She pushes him to talk about rage, addiction, and the urge to destroy. From the fire she sets in her own loft to accidentally ending up alone with him after fights with Rita, every gesture says the same thing. Your impulses aren't a relapse. They're your truth. The focus is not just on her being clingy. It's on how she reframes the dark passenger as authenticity, and in doing so, gets Dexter to lower his guard. That's the psychological trap. Dexter is emotionally raw, freshly exposed by the Bay Harbor butcher investigation and his breakup with Rita. He's attracted to danger, to anyone who doesn't demand control or the code, just presence. So, he underestimates her. He treats Leela as volatile but harmless, a chaos he can compartmentalize. The central question he never asks is simple. What happens when someone this obsessed decides to start checking the facts for herself? Because Leela has something Brian never had, and Dokes never wanted. A legitimate cover to monitor his life. Narcotics Anonymous. As Dexter's sponsor, she can call at any hour. She can ask where he's been, why he missed a meeting, why he disappeared right when the Bay Harbor butcher case spikes. To keep this clear, NA hands her three things: a reason to track his movements, a script for invasive questions, and a moral shield that makes any suspicion of her look cruel. We see the shift the first time she crosses from confidante to investigator. She rifles his things. She checks his phone. She notices the gaps, between where Dexter says he is and where he actually goes. That isn't just jealousy. It's an informal investigation, powered by obsession and justified by recovery language. When she tails him, follows the thread of his lies out of Miami and into isolation, we watch curiosity become a loaded gun pointed straight at his double life. And then there's the fatal piece. Dexter himself hands her GPS, the same data he uses to plan kills, to map dumps, to maintain control over his nocturnal trajectory, becomes a breadcrumb trail Leela can follow. Along the way, she's not just chasing a boyfriend. She's walking a roadmap straight toward the cabin, straight toward Dokes, and straight toward the next catastrophic collapse we're about to unpack. And while Leela is following Dexter's GPS trail through the swamp, the FBI is doing the same thing on a much larger scale. Different tools, same trajectory. They're building a map of a monster who is, unknowingly, mapping himself. Let's kick things off with that conference room scene. Bodies on the table, charts on the walls. Lundy walks the task force through a grid of the Miami coastline, then overlays ocean current data, dump coordinates, and recovery sites. From a distance, it looks abstract, but the more he talks, the more it crystallizes into something uncomfortably specific. A ritual, a plan, a rhythm of killing and disposal that has been hiding in plain sight. To keep this clear, Lundy is doing exactly what Dexter does in reverse. Dexter studies tides and currents to make evidence vanish. Lundy studies those same currents to make the killer appear. The task force watches as he uses drift models to triangulate where the bodies must have entered the water, narrowing it down to a tight operational zone off the coast. A whiteboard that starts as chaos turns into a clean pattern of dots and arrows, and suddenly, the Bay Harbor butcher isn't a ghost. He's a commuter with a route. The focus is not just on the science, but on how eerily close that model comes to Dexter's real dumping routine. The grid lands right on his favorite disposal area. The estimated timings match his nocturnal schedule. The assumption that the killer understands forensics, that's Dexter's entire identity projected back at him. His invisible ritual becomes a predictable algorithm, rendered in dry erase marker, and Dexter has to stand there and watch. As a forensic expert, he can see every place where Lundy's analysis is sharp, every place where it brushes the edge of his actual method. He's forced to silently critique the investigation, to think, if you shift that zone 5 miles south, you're on top of my kill sites. But he can't say that without detonating his cover. So, he performs detachment, while internally he's experiencing the central question of this season. What happens when the tools he uses for control are turned against him? Here's the pattern interrupt. The investigation is right. The conclusion is wrong. All of this accurate science, all of this careful behavioral profiling gets misattributed to Dokes because the blood slides and the existing narrative have already framed him as the butcher. Institutional momentum takes over. Evidence is no longer neutral, it's gravitational. Operationally, this is a near exposure of the highest order. The investigation has decoded Dexter's logistics, his timing, his geography. They have his ritual on the board. The only reason it doesn't collapse his life right here is that everyone in that room is now committed to fitting the pattern around the wrong man. And that misalignment sets up the next failure, where the plan to close the case around Dokes needs one final catastrophic act to make it permanent. That final catastrophic act isn't just the explosion in the Everglades. It's the slow detonation of Dexter's home life while he's busy staging a stranger's death. From Rita's living room to Deb's cramped apartment, the real crime scenes of Season 2 are emotional, and every lie Dexter tells there pushes the Bay Harbor butcher investigation closer to him. Let's kick things off with Rita. Early in the season, she's reading missed calls, empty excuses, and Dexter's blank affect long before she knows the word sponsor. He disappears at odd hours. He comes back wired or strangely calm. His plan is to paste over all of that with the NA story, addiction, relapse, Leela. On paper, it's perfect. A socially acceptable darkness that explains everything without revealing anything. But the central question becomes, what happens when the cover story starts demanding more attention than the life it's supposed to protect? Leela isn't just a name Dexter can drop, she's a physical presence. She shows up at the bowling alley. She inserts herself into family space. Rita sees the chemistry, the private jokes, the way Dexter seems emotionally available with this stranger, in a way he never quite is with her. Suspicion isn't a leap, it's a straight line. To keep this clear, Dexter's double life in Season 2 doesn't fail first at the crime scene. It fails at the dinner table. Rita calls him out on the lies, on the secrecy, on how NA always seems to mean Lila. Every confrontation requires improvisation. Another half-truth, another promise, another late-night drive that is supposedly about recovery, but is actually a trip to the cabin, to Dokes, to the heart of the investigation that's hunting him. In parallel, Deb is trying to rebuild a self that was held captive and nearly killed. She's sleeping on Dexter's couch, jumping at shadows, then walking into work where she's on the task force chasing her brother's crimes. The focus is not just on her trauma, it's on how much she needs Dexter to be stable, present, emotionally real. She vents to him about the Bay Harbor butcher. She leans on him as the one safe constant, and every time he ducks a conversation or vanishes when she needs him, that's another tiny fracture in the alibi of good brother. Along the way, the NA lie mutates from a simple cover into a full-time performance. Meetings, phone calls, sponsor drama, emotional disclosures Dexter has to fake in one room while calculating currents and evidence trails in another. The more emotional labor he spends maintaining this version of himself, the sloppier his operational planning becomes. He misses cues. He underestimates how much Rita and Deb are tracking his patterns. This is a relational failure cascade. The more his personal life fractures, the more likely someone is to follow him, check his stories, or call at the exact wrong moment. We're watching a man who believes control comes from better logistics, while the real threat is that the people closest to him are now motivated to investigate his absences with the same intensity the FBI is using on those ocean dumps. So when Dexter finally cages Dokes in that Everglades cabin, it looks on the surface like the investigation problem is solved. No more tail, no more suspicious questions at Miami Metro, just a neat off-grid solution. But the second Dokes wakes up, the whole plan starts trying to claw its way back into the light. Let's kick things off with the physical reality. Dokes doesn't accept the role of passive hostage for a single frame. He tests the chains, measures Dexter's timing, watches every move. The moment Dexter gets close enough, Dokes lunges, slamming him into the wall, trying to turn the cabin itself into a weapon. Later, when Dexter miscalculates the dosage and leaves him with too much mobility, Dokes bolts for the door, crashing into furniture, tearing up the space. Each attempt fails, but each one leaves the room a little more disturbed, a little less controlled. To keep this clear, these aren't just action beats. They're operational failures that generate residue. Broken boards, scuffed floors, blood, sweat, and fingerprints in a place Dexter barely knows. If a wildlife officer, a random fisherman, or the FBI's expanding search grid ever intersects that cabin, they're not walking into a clean kill room. They're walking into a crime scene that tells a story Dexter never planned to explain. And Dokes isn't only fighting with his body, He goes after Dexter's psychology. He appeals directly to the code, hammering the same point over and over. Dexter doesn't kill innocents. Dexter needs a justification. So what's the justification here? He threatens to expose him if he gets out, yes, but he also needles at the central question Dexter is trying not to face. Is he still following Harry's rules, or has the code already collapsed under the weight of convenience? Every conversation is an attempted escape route, not just from the cabin, but from the narrative Dexter is hiding inside. Meanwhile, time is Dexter's real enemy. Every failed escape attempt still moves the clock forward. Food runs, tranquilizer refills, blood slide disposal. Each major section of Dexter's life now includes a detour to the Everglades. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. The more locations his double life requires, the more vectors of failure appear. The focus is not just on Doak's rattling chains, it's on Dexter driving lonely roads again and again, creating a commute to his own potential exposure. Any one of those trips can be tailed by LaGuerta, intercepted by the FBI, or, as we'll see, hijacked by Leela, following the emotional scent of his lies. Every mile he adds to this secret increases the chance that random traffic, a patrol car, or a gas station camera turns the cabin from hidden asset into mapped destination. Along the way, the cabin stops feeling like a solution and starts reading as a time bomb. Dokes is inside, straining at the restraints. The outside world is circling, tightening its net. And Dexter is trapped in the middle, trying to keep both from ever touching. How long can that last before someone else finds the door first? Someone else does find the door first. And it's not the FBI, it's not Miami Metro, it's Dexter's NA sponsor with a fixation. This is where the investigation around Dexter stops being procedural and becomes personal, where control doesn't just slip, it gets hijacked. Leela doesn't stumble into the Everglades by chance. She reverse engineers Dexter's world. She watches his disappearances, clocks his late-night drives, and then weaponizes the very tools he thinks make him safe. The GPS in his car, the predictable trajectory of his meetings, the way his cover story always pushes him away from Miami at the same hours. To keep this clear, she's not following a suspect, she's following a lover. That's exactly why Dexter never factors her into the plan. When she finally tracks him to the cabin, we shift from romance to horror in one cut. A quiet clearing, a remote shack. And inside, not a relapse, not a secret affair, but James Dokes chained like an animal. The shock on Lila's face isn't just fear, it's recalibration. In a single glance, she rewrites Dexter from damaged soul to active predator. And yet, instead of running, she leans in. Why? This is where Leela becomes more dangerous than Dokes ever was. Dokes is bound by law, by ethics, by the internal logic of an investigation. He needs evidence, a confession, a chain of custody. Leela needs none of that. She can act immediately, irrationally, without paperwork or partners or probable cause. No warrants, no oversight, just impulse. In this video, we're going to keep returning to moments like this, where the lack of institutional constraint doesn't make Dexter safer, it makes him infinitely more exposed. The central question here isn't just, will she turn him in? It's what story does she tell herself about what she's seeing? Leela's psychology doesn't register Dexter's darkness as a crime, it codes it as intimacy. She decides this isn't a monster to escape, it's a destiny to protect. The cabin, the prisoner, the chains become proof that she alone understands the real Dexter. That twisted logic is far more volatile than Dokes' righteous anger. Pattern interrupt. In most thrillers, this is the part where the outsider blows everything up by going to the cops. Leela does the opposite. She becomes an accomplice Dexter never asked for. She destroys evidence, manipulates the narrative, and shields him in ways he can't predict or control. The focus is not just on her saving him from exposure, but on how that salvation deepens his long-term failure. So this moment is a combined relational and operational collapse. His emotional entanglement has granted full access to his most damning secret, and he's handed it to the least stable person in his orbit. Each major section will show how Season 2 keeps repeating that pattern. The people closest to Dexter don't just risk finding out the truth, they start rewriting it for him. And next, we'll see how Lila's protection turns the cabin from a liability into a crime scene that permanently rewires the Bay Harbor butcher case. So when Lila walks into that Everglades cabin, we're watching the most important piece of exonerating evidence in Season 2 quietly step onto the chopping block. Dokes is chained, bleeding, hoarse from explaining the truth no one will hear. Dexter is the real monster. And then Leela brings gasoline. Control leaves the room the second she twists that cap. We see it in brutal, concrete beats. She drags the can, sloshing fuel across the wooden floor, up the walls, around the man who's been right about Dexter from the beginning. Dokes begs, bargains, tries to weaponize the investigation. He's a cop. They're looking for him. This is bigger than her obsession. Leela doesn't care. One flick of the lighter, one tiny theatrical spark, and the whole cabin erupts. Fire races along the fuel lines, blossoms into an inferno, and Dokes' screams are swallowed by the blast. In that instant, the central question of the Bay Harbor butcher case is violently simplified. Before the explosion, this cabin is a crime scene with context. Chains, plastic, tools, a layout that shows Dexter built a prison, not a kill room. A place that could have been processed, photographed, analyzed to reveal a plan that doesn't match the butcher's usual pattern. After the explosion, it's just a crater with a dead suspect in the middle. To keep this clear, Leela doesn't just kill Dokes. She erases the only physical space where Dexter's innocence in Dokes' murder could ever be proven. No restraints to test, no fingerprints in a coherent pattern, no evidence of captivity versus mutual combat. The investigation loses its one location that might have forced the FBI to ask, why would the Bay Harbor butcher chain his supposed rival instead of dumping him like everyone else? When Dexter arrives and sees the charred wreckage, we watch his psychology fracture in real time. He's horrified because Dokes is dead on his watch, killed for knowing the truth. He's relieved because the most dangerous witness against him has been vaporized. And then there's that third emotion, slower and colder, the realization that Leela has just rewritten the entire narrative in his favor. His failed plan to frame Dokes has collapsed into something much worse and much more effective. From the outside, Miami Metro and the FBI read the site as a perfect ending. Dokes' remains in a burned-out cabin tied to the drug case, near where the Bay Harbor butcher evidence trail has been circling. A suspected serial killer, on the run, dying in an explosion that conveniently destroys further proof. It lines up with their grid maps, their psychological profile, their need for closure. Why dig deeper when the story finally makes sense? The focus is not just on Leela's violence here, but on what it does to Dexter's trajectory. His survival is now welded to the murder of an innocent man who was right about him all along. This is the darkest pivot of the season. From this point forward, every time Dexter insists he's following a code, we know that his continued freedom depends on a crime he didn't plan, couldn't control, and still chooses to benefit from. And along the way, Season 2 will keep asking, once your life is saved by that kind of failure, what does innocent even mean anymore? So when the cabin goes up in flames and Dokes' body is pulled from the wreckage, something eerie settles over Miami Metro. The man who'd been the department's constant irritant, the one voice saying this doesn't add up, is gone. The mood is somber, people wear the appropriate grief on their faces, but underneath there's this unmistakable current of relief. The nightmare has a name now. The case has a villain. Everyone can breathe again. From a task force war room filled with body dump grids to blood slides pinned on evidence boards, we've watched this investigation consume the building. Careers were staked on catching the Bay Harbor butcher. Deb's anxiety spiked. LaGuerta's authority wobbled. Lundy's reputation was on the line. When Dokes dies in an explosion beside dismembered corpses and a cache of slides, the central question quietly shifts from, is this true, to can we finally move on? To keep this clear, the inconsistencies are screaming. Dokes has the slides in the cabin, but there are no other trophies in his apartment, car, locker, or past postings. His history as a black ops soldier explains violence, not ritualized dismemberment and meticulous ocean dumps. His psychology doesn't match the profile Lundy kept sketching out. No compulsion pattern, no solitary routine, no private workspace that fits years of kills. And his death is almost too convenient. The only man who could say I was being held here against my will just happens to blow up with the evidence. Yet the investigation bends around those gaps instead of through them. Lundy, the brilliant outsider who mapped currents and victimology with surgical precision, signs off on the Dokes theory. Not because it's perfect, but because it is complete. The physical evidence aligns in a way that satisfies the plan he's already built. Slides, bodies, a fugitive cop with a temper and a murky past. Under pressure from the FBI, from the brass, from a city that needs closure, he accepts a resolution that doesn't quite fit his own profile. Control gives way to consensus. And Dexter is right there, quietly tightening the seal. As the harmless lab guy, he walks the crime scene, confirms that the slides match the Bay Harbor butcher's MO, and subtly frames everything as the work of a lone killer unraveling. He offers interpretations that reinforce the narrative. Dokes must have escalated, must have panicked, must have brought his trophies to the cabin as he lost control. Every word he says is a small nudge toward closure. And because he's the one translating the blood, no one questions the translation. The focus is not just on individual blind spots, but on an institutional failure that becomes Dexter's greatest shield. Once Miami Metro decides the story is over, reopening it would mean admitting they misread a colleague, misread the evidence, misread themselves. So they don't. They lock in Dokes as the monster and let the case go cold. But if the system can be satisfied this easily, what happens the next time Dexter's life starts to collapse in public? What happens is Leela. The investigation relaxes, the task force exhales. And into that vacuum walks the one person who actually watched Dexter's world explode and decided to light a match herself. In this video, we're going to treat Lila's post-cabin behavior as its own crime scene. From the moment the Everglades go up in flames, she pivots from chaotic fling to self-appointed guardian of Dexter's true self. She shows up at his apartment, at Rita's, at Miami Metro, repeating the same refrain. She's the only one who really understands him. It's not romance. It's leverage. Every visit is a reminder that she knows about the cabin, about Dokes, about the fire that neatly aligned with the FBI's plan to close the case. To keep this clear, we need to track her moves like evidence. She doesn't just burn the cabin and walk away. She erases it. No accelerant cans left behind, no witnesses who see her arrive with Dokes, no trace of the struggle that would have shown he was a prisoner, not a predator. The one place that could have contradicted the Bay Harbor butcher narrative is reduced to ash. Then she goes further. She steals Dexter's GPS printout, lies to Deb about boundaries, and quietly inserts herself into every gap in the investigation where a real question might have surfaced. The central question becomes, whose plan is actually running now? Dexter thinks he's managing Fallout, using his NA sponsor as a convenient alibi for late nights and erratic behavior. In reality, Leela is the one managing him. She weaponizes his cover story, threatens to expose their connection to Rita, and hints that she could share what she saw in that cabin with anyone who crosses her. She is both arsonist and alibi, the person who destroyed the scene and the person who can reconstruct it, selectively, for maximum damage. And Dexter feels the trap. Operationally, he needs her. If she decides to tell the FBI that Dexter had Dokes caged in the Everglades before the explosion, the entire investigation reopens. Relationally, he can't cut her off without triggering the very meltdown he fears. Every day she's free is another day she can escalate. Another day she can call Rita, confront Deb, or walk into Miami Metro and collapse the story they've all agreed to believe. This is the irony that sits at the heart of Season 2's trajectory. The meticulous planner, the man who trusts ritual, data, and the code as safeguards, is suddenly dependent on the silence of someone he cannot predict or control. His greatest shield is now a volatile witness, with her own psychology, her own agenda, and no moral breaks. Along the way, the cabin fire looks less like a clean solution and more like a delayed fuse problem. Leela didn't just end Dokes. She created a new, unstable variable that turns every future move into a risk calculation. The case may be closed, but the real collapse is still coming, and it's walking around with a British accent and a box of stolen secrets. Leela walks away from the ashes, the case file closes on Dokes, and for a second, it looks like Dexter's out. But the real threat this season isn't the woman who burned the cabin. It's the man who quietly sits across from Dexter at a shared desk, building a psychological map of the Bay Harbor butcher, while the butcher sharpens pencils for him. Let's kick things off with those task force scenes. Lundy asks the room what kind of man keeps blood slides as trophies, and Dexter, trying to sound detached, offers insights that are basically a confession in passive voice. He talks about ritual, control, the need to catalog victims. He's not guessing. He's describing his own code. Every time he opens his mouth in that briefing room, the investigation brushes against the truth, and then, somehow, drifts away. To keep this clear, Lundy is not Lagerda chasing office politics or Dokes running on instinct. He's methodical. Patient, he grids the ocean dumps, tracks currents, reconstructs a trajectory of kills that should have led straight back to Miami Metro's conveniently flawless blood guy. In another version of this season, Lundy looks at that pattern, then at Dexter's eerily precise forensic work, and asks the one forbidden question: why does the evidence tech think like the killer better than anyone else? Instead, we watch a psychological chess game where only one player knows it's actually life or death. Dexter has to be helpful without being too helpful. Smart, but never the smartest. He suggests the butcher is organized, disciplined, maybe even guided by a personal morality, then quickly walks it back, so it sounds theoretical. One extra comment, one moment of visible investment, and Lundy's curiosity could have pivoted from the case file to the man holding it. That's the razor's edge Dexter lives on. The central question here is not just why Lundy doesn't catch him, but why he doesn't even really look. And the answer, ironically, is Deb. As Lundy and Deb grow closer, his emotional focus shifts. The hunter falls, just a little, for the sister of his perfect suspect. The focus is not just on the Bay Harbor butcher anymore. It's on protecting Deb from the consequences of the investigation, on mentoring her, on imagining a future that doesn't involve tearing her life apart. Along the way, Deb keeps vouching for Dexter, humanizing him in front of the one man whose job is to see past masks. Her loyalty becomes armor. Lundy sees a devoted brother, a reliable colleague, a quiet technician who brings Deb coffee, not a predator who has weaponized that exact persona. This is an existential near miss. If Lundy ever truly saw Dexter, really saw him, the myth of control would have collapsed instantly under the weight of a mind as sharp and disciplined as his own. Season 2 lets them share a desk, share theories, even share concern for Deb, without ever letting their true identities collide. The next cracks in Dexter's illusion won't come from a profiler's insight, but from something messier: family, grief, and a baby on the way. Family, grief, and a baby on the way. On paper, this should stabilize Dexter's life. In practice, it becomes the pressure cooker that makes his NA cover story start to buckle. Let's kick things off with Rita watching Dexter disappear in plain sight. He's late to dinners, bails on plans, drifts through conversations with that blank processing trauma stare. The plan is simple: blame it all on recovery. NA meetings. Step work. Emotional exhaustion. But Rita's not stupid, and she's not getting answers. Every time he invokes NA to dodge a question, her frustration hardens into suspicion. Why won't he talk about his using? Why does his sponsor call at weird hours? Why is he more distant now that he's supposedly getting better? In this video, we're going to track how that NA lie exposes a different kind of failure. Not forensic, but relational. Dexter can imitate the logistics of an addict in recovery. He can show up to a church basement, sit in a circle, even parrot the language. What he can't do is inhabit the psychology that makes the story believable. He can't share. He can't be vulnerable. He can't be consistent. When Rita asks basic questions, what did you use? How bad did it get? What are you feeling now? He offers vague platitudes that sound like they were ripped from a pamphlet, not a life. To keep this clear, the central question for Rita becomes brutally simple. Is Dexter actually getting better, or is he just hiding something new? Her eventual ultimatum, commit to recovery honestly or lose this family, doesn't just raise the emotional stakes. It forces Dexter to double down. More late nights at meetings, more time with Leela as his sponsor, more visible stress that, to anyone watching the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, could read as gnawing guilt. A boyfriend unraveling right as the city hunts a serial killer? That's not a great look. And the NA world itself is a new field of exposure. Sponsors, group members, meeting schedules, these are all moving parts that can be checked. If Deb, Lundy, or even a random detective decided to verify his alibi, what happens when a secretary says, "We've never seen that guy," or a sponsor gives a slightly different timeline? The focus is not just on Dexter's lies at home, but on how many independent witnesses he's now created who could accidentally contradict him. Along the way, we see that this is less a clever cover and more a relational collapse in slow motion. Rita feels shut out. She questions his commitment as a partner and as a father. The domestic fantasy Harry's code was supposed to protect starts to look fragile, contingent on Dexter performing an emotional life he doesn't actually live. Exposure doesn't have to come from a blood slide or a fingerprint. It can arrive as a breakup, a custody battle, a devastated woman telling a federal task force something is very wrong with him. And Season 2 is not done weaponizing that wrongness. Because once Leela steps fully into the picture, the NA lie doesn't just threaten Dexter's home, it gives someone else the script to burn it all down. And Season 2 is not done weaponizing that wrongness, because the most dangerous person circling Dexter isn't Leela, or Dokes, or Lundy's task force. It's the woman who sleeps on the other side of his thin apartment wall. Dexter Morgan walks into this season already shattered, fresh off being kidnapped by the ice truck killer, waking up duct-taped in a plastic-wrapped kill room. Realizing her fiancé was her brother's biological sibling, her psychology is hanging by a thread. Then, Miami Metro hands her the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, which is, without knowing it, a forensic autopsy of Dexter's entire career. Every body dump, every cut, every pattern of control he thought was invisible. To keep this clear, we're watching two parallel investigations. The official one, with Lundy mapping currents and victim grids, and Deb's unofficial one, where she keeps bumping into the emotional dead zone that is her brother. She sees Dexter relapse into NA meetings, disappear at strange hours, show up at crime scenes with that blank, too calm stare. She asks him why he never really talks about what Brian did to her, why he doesn't seem angry, why he doesn't feel anything. The central question sitting under every one of those moments is brutal. What happens if Deb ever lets herself answer those questions honestly? Because the clues are there. Dexter just happens to be the lab guy whose work keeps feeding the task force's profile. He just happens to know way too much about dismemberment and ocean currents. He just happens to be the one person who never breaks down about the ice truck killer, even as Deb is having panic attacks in the parking lot. At a certain point, coincidence starts to look like a plan. Here's the pattern interrupt. Deb is a good cop. She trusts instinct, pattern, motive, but whenever those tools drift toward Dexter, she slams the door. Why? Because she needs one stable thing, one safe person. After Brian, after the failed engagement, after moving back into Dexter's place, she cannot afford the consequences of seeing him as anything other than her anchor. So the focus is not just on what Deb misses, but on how actively she misses it. She makes excuses for his flat affect. She reframes his evasiveness as being private. She accepts the NA cover story because the alternative is unthinkable. If Dexter is part of the horror she's cataloging on the murder board, then the Morgan family mythology, Harry the hero cop, the rescued little boy, the protective big brother, doesn't just crack. It collapses overnight. And Dexter knows it. He exploits that need with surgical precision. He holds her during panic attacks, talks her through breathing exercises, shows up with takeout and jokes at exactly the right moment. Every gesture is genuine in its way, but it's also misdirection. Comfort as cover, empathy as camouflage. In this video, we're going to track how close Deb comes to stepping over that line, and how every time she pulls back, Dexter's trajectory gets darker. Because there's a point coming where her denial won't just protect him, it will actively help him get away with murder. Comfort as cover, empathy as camouflage. And then, almost overnight, Dexter's emotional problem with Leela stops being about boundaries and breakups and turns into a literal kidnapping. Leela taking Astor and Cody to that abandoned theme park is the moment Season 2 stops flirting with danger and drags Dexter's double life into broad daylight. She's not just acting out because he broke up with her, she's running a plan. Erase Rita, erase the kids, isolate Dexter long enough that the only person left who understands him is her. In her warped psychology, abducting his girlfriend's children is an act of devotion. To keep this clear, Leela's escalation isn't random. She has already seen the cabin. She has already pieced together that Dexter is the Bay Harbor Butcher, or something close enough. Up to this point, she's been a secret keeper, burning the evidence, lying to the FBI, turning Dokes into a martyr Dexter can live with. Now she flips roles. She becomes an active, visible threat. There's a missing kids report, a frantic mother, and a very real police response. Law enforcement isn't vaguely circling a forensic tech anymore. They're hunting Dexter's unhinged ex. That shift is huge. It drags the investigation into spaces Dexter cannot script. He can't hide behind lab reports or the code. He has to move. Fast, physically, in this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between what Dexter thinks he can control and the chaos other people introduce. Here, his usual distance collapses. He races to find Leela and the kids, driving, searching, breaking into spaces, putting himself exactly where witnesses, security cameras, or patrol cars might clock him. The central question in this sequence is simple. How does he get away with this? Any misstep in rescuing Astor and Cody could have blown everything open. Imagine a passing officer seeing Dexter alone with two traumatized kids at a locked amusement park. Imagine Leela surviving long enough to scream that he's a serial killer, that she saw his kill room, that she watched him cage Dokes. Even without believing her, someone writes that down. A report exists. A statement lingers in the file. And then there are the traces. Dexter touching doors, gates, vehicles, Lila's body later turning up in Paris with his history all over her. Each major section will show how often the show simply refuses to follow through on those consequences. In any realistic investigation, the Bay Harbor butcher and the man connected to this kidnapping drama would start to overlap. What we're watching here is a relational crisis that forces Dexter into overt heroics. He gets to be the savior, the protector, the man who rescues Rita's children from the monster he created. But that performance has a cost. The more he plays hero in public, the more visible his double life becomes at the exact moment he needs to disappear. And that visibility is going to matter when we follow him into Season 3, where the fantasy of the righteous vigilante finally meets someone who wants in on the act. Dexter walks away from Miami a free man. Dokes is dead. Lila is gone. The Bay Harbor butcher case is solved. It looks like closure. But then we cut to Paris, a postcard city that suddenly becomes the site of Dexter's most brazen, least controlled kill of the entire season. We see Leela wandering through a cramped Paris flat, flipping through sketches, trying to reinvent herself yet again. A knock at the door. Dexter standing there with that disarming half-smile. In this video, we're going to treat this moment not as a victory lap, but as the final, reckless extension of a plan that should have already collapsed back in Miami. He has left his jurisdiction, his routine, his usual safeguards, just to eliminate the last person who knows too much. To keep this clear, Dexter usually operates like a closed loop. Stalk in Miami. Kill in Miami. Dump in Miami's ocean. Undercurrents he has mapped, and tides he understands. In Paris, none of that applies. The kill happens in an unfamiliar apartment in a foreign country with no backup identity, no kill room plastic, no established disposal site. He stabs Leela in an improvised scene, leaves her body there, and walks out into a city where he doesn't know the language of the police, the rhythms of the investigation, or the forensic standards that might be applied. Operationally, this is chaos disguised as control. International flights leave records, passport scans, airline manifests, hotel check-ins, credit card trails. If French law enforcement connects Leela's body to her life in Miami, what do they find? A woman tied directly to the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, to Dokes' death in the Everglades, to a burned cabin that conveniently erased the only proof of his innocence. The focus is not just on the single crime scene in Paris, but on the web of prior events that could be reopened if anyone starts asking the central question: why did the prime witness against a dead serial killer end up murdered overseas? Psychologically, this is where the mask slips. Dexter tells himself he is following Harry's code, tying off a dangerous loose end who has already killed Dokes and threatened his family. But this isn't a meticulous removal of a future killer. It's a personal vendetta, a punishment for betrayal, for emotional humiliation, for the way Leela exposed his own psychology back to him. Is this really about protecting Rita and the kids? Or about restoring the illusion that he alone controls the narrative of his life? Each major section will keep returning to this drift, from supposed necessity into self-serving violence. Along the way, Paris becomes the season's final almost exposure, the moment where one misstep would have turned Dexter from a local urban legend into an international suspect. Imagine a neighbor remembering his face, a security camera catching his exit, an overzealous French detective tracing Leela's visa back to Miami Metro. The Bay Harbor butcher case would not be closed. It would be exported. And that's the trajectory we need to carry forward. Because if Season 2 ends with Dexter willing to cross an ocean to protect the myth, what happens when he finds someone who doesn't just suspect the truth, but wants to share it? Season 3 is about to answer that. And the consequences will make Paris look restrained. Season 2 doesn't just export the myth to Paris. It spends 12 episodes proving that myth should have collapsed long before Dexter ever bought a plane ticket. To keep this clear, we can map the entire season as a forensic disaster, a chain of operational failures that keeps tightening around him and somehow never quite snaps. Let's kick things off with the ocean dumps. Dexter's foundational plan is simple. The Atlantic is his evidence shredder. But the FBI grid shatters that illusion. From sonar sweeps to current analysis, they turn his perfect disposal method into a neat pattern of body parts. The ocean isn't hiding him. It's highlighting him. That's failure number 1. The core logistics of the code are empirically wrong. On top of that, the blood slide discovery. A random maintenance check exposes the trophies in his air conditioner. The exact signature the investigation is chasing. Those slides should be the smoking gun that links the Bay Harbor butcher to Miami Metro's favorite blood spatter analyst. Instead, institutional blind spots and Dokes' reputation reroute the suspicion. The evidence is solid. The interpretation collapses. Then we hit the shipping container botch. Dexter's attempt to preemptively kill Dokes is the opposite of meticulous. He loses the element of surprise, gets disarmed, and ends up imprisoned by the man he's trying to frame. This is not control. This is a hostage situation created by his own escalation. Every improvisation from that point forward, drugging Dokes, moving him to the Everglades cabin, adds more physical locations, more potential witnesses, more trace. The cabin imprisonment crystallizes the pattern. We have a federal manhunt, a missing detective, and Dexter commuting to a kill site like it's a side gig. Lila's intrusion and arson rescue him, but only by obliterating exculpatory evidence and locking in Dokes as the butcher. Her fire is both a literal and metaphorical pattern interrupt. The central question stops being, is Dexter careful enough? And becomes, how much random chaos has to intervene for this to keep working? Even the Paris kill is an operational failure disguised as a victory lap. He flies across an ocean, murders Leela in a foreign country, and walks away as if international jurisdictions and CCTV don't exist. That's not a master plan. That's a gambler, high on survivorship bias. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this gap between Dexter's self-image and his track record. The focus is not just on who he kills, but on how every failure forces a riskier patch, which then seeds the next collapse. Season 2 shows a system held together by luck, other people's mistakes, and narrative mercy. Operationally, the code is fragile, the psychology is delusional, and the trajectory is unsustainable. The only reason Dexter walks into Season 3 is because the world around him keeps missing what's right in front of it. Relationally, that unsustainable system is already cracking. Season 2 is where every major connection Dexter relies on as camouflage, comfort, or a tool turns into a potential crime scene. The focus is not just on the investigation closing in, but on how love, hate, and obsession drag his secret life into the open. Let's kick things off with Dokes, because he is the purest relational flashpoint. From the pilot, his instinct screams that Dexter is wrong. By Season 2, that suspicion hardens into surveillance, confrontation, and finally, the shipping container. Dokes starts as a professional antagonist Dexter can outmaneuver with lab reports and office banter. Then, the plan flips. Once Dokes has the blood slides in his hands, that relationship isn't cover, it's liability. Dexter's psychology responds by escalating, kidnapping a cop, improvising a jungle prison, and trying to manage a living witness who knows the code, the ritual, the truth. Leela is the dark mirror of that problem. On paper, she's the perfect cover story, a Narcotics Anonymous sponsor who can explain Dexter's erratic behavior to Rita, Deb, and Lundy. She offers validation, a place to put his addiction narrative, and an emotional pressure valve. But along the way, her obsession mutates the arrangement. She stalks, manipulates, and ultimately discovers Dokes in the cabin. What began as a tool becomes a free agent in the plot, burning the cabin, erasing the only proof of Dexter's guilt and Dokes' innocence. She almost exposes him by seeing too much, then saves him by destroying everything. Rita sits on the opposite end of the spectrum. She's not hunting Dexter, she's trying to build a family. Her ultimatum about honesty and NA forces him to double down on the sponsor lie, which pulls Leela deeper into orbit. Dexter's hunger to be a good boyfriend and father doesn't restrain the dark passenger. It pushes him into riskier emotional choices, public fights, visible disappearances, and a paper trail of half-truths that any serious investigation could shred in a day. The central question becomes, can he maintain the illusion of normalcy without detonating it from the inside? Deb and Lundy form the final, brutal loop. Deb's trauma from the ice truck killer leaves her clinging to work and to Lundy's calm, methodical presence. Lundy, in turn, brings the FBI into the family orbit, literally pinning the Bay Harbor butcher's pattern on the wall next to Dexter's desk. To keep this clear, Dexter is sitting at family dinners with a man hunting him, comforting a sister whose healing depends on the success of that hunt. And yet, love and loyalty distort the consequences. Deb's faith in Dexter, Lundy's affection for Deb, Rita's trust, even Lila's fixation, all of them bend evidence, blunt suspicion, or redirect blame. By the end of the season, we're not looking at a lone wolf slipping through the cracks. We're looking at a web. Every strand Dexter touches vibrates with potential exposure, and the same relationships that almost collapse his double life are exactly what hold the whole broken structure together, for now. And that web doesn't just keep Dexter's secret intact, it rewires his entire belief system. The same season that almost exposes him is the season that quietly destroys the story he tells himself about why he's allowed to exist. To keep this clear, we need to track 3 fractures: letting Dokes be framed, outsourcing his salvation to Leela's murder, and extending his killing all the way to Paris, just to clean up his personal life. Each one isn't just a tactical adjustment. Each one is a direct hit on Harry's code, the supposed blueprint that keeps Dexter from becoming the very thing Harry claimed to fear. Let's kick things off with Dokes. On paper, Harry's rules are simple. Only kill confirmed killers. Don't get caught. Never take an innocent life. But when Dexter locks an innocent man in that Everglades cage, listens to him beg, and then walks away knowing the investigation is hardening around Dokes, what is that if not a slow-motion execution by proxy? He doesn't plunge the knife himself, but he allows the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation to collapse onto the one person who actually saw him clearly. Dexter's psychology scrambles to keep up. He tells himself Dokes is dangerous, that exposure would ruin Deb, that the greater good of his continued killing justifies one ruined life and reputation. The central question becomes, is this still a code, or is it now just a hierarchy of excuses? Every time he visits that cage, the justifications get more strained, more self-protective, less about justice, and more about survival. Then, Leela lights the match. Literally, she kills Dokes, burns the cabin, erases the only physical proof that Dexter wasn't the butcher. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these moments where reality hands Dexter a verdict he didn't plan, but gladly accepts. He didn't plan Dokes' death, but he relies on it. He didn't plan for Leela to murder, but he uses that murder as a reset button. The focus is not just on what he does, but on what he allows to stand, because it benefits him. Harry's code says don't kill the innocent. Season 2 shows Dexter letting an innocent die for him, then flying across an ocean to kill Leela in Paris, not because she's an ongoing threat to Miami, but because she's an ongoing threat to his comfort. At that point, what separates a necessary monster from a selfish one who just doesn't want to face consequences? By the finale, Dexter walks away clean, celebrated, and more hollow than ever. The world decides he's safe and normal, precisely when he's most ethically compromised. And the next time the code is tested, we'll see just how far that hollow center can stretch before something finally breaks. Harry is still the voice in Dexter's head this season, but Season 2 is the first time we really see that voice run out of script. The world changes around Dexter, the pressure escalates, and Harry's lessons suddenly feel like training wheels on a motorcycle headed for a wall. Let's kick things off by going back to the basics Harry drilled in. Channel the dark passenger. Don't deny it. Select only those who deserve it. Never get caught. Stalk. Confirm. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. On paper, it's a closed system of control. But the second those blood slides turn up in Dexter's air conditioner, that system collapses. The trophies Harry allowed as a psychological outlet become the exact forensic pattern that powers the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. To keep this clear, Harry's code was built for a simpler Miami. No FBI body dump grids. No ocean current analysis that can trace a trash bag back to a marina. No Leela watching Dexter's every mood swing and turning his NA cover story into leverage. Harry imagined neighbors and nosy cops. Dexter is facing task forces, surveillance, and a coworker who's an actual human lie detector. Look at how many of Dexter's Season 2 failures are direct products of the code, not deviations from it. The ritual plastic, the carefully wrapped bodies dumped offshore, the blood slides, cataloged like a serial killer's scrapbook. Each of those is a rule, a routine, a way to feel in control. Each becomes data. Patterns, evidence. Harry gave Dexter a structure to manage his psychology. But he never accounted for a world where that structure would be reverse engineered by the very institutions Dexter works for. And then there's the emotional trap. Harry didn't just give Dexter a plan. He gave him an identity. You can control this. You can be safe if you follow my rules. So when the investigation tightens, when Dokes corners him in the shipping container, When the FBI's profile starts to look uncomfortably like his life, Dexter doesn't read those as proof that the code is failing. He reads them as tests of his faith in it. How do you abandon the only blueprint that ever made you feel human? Here's the pattern interrupt. Harry, the supposed guardian, is now a liability. In this video, we're going to keep watching that shift. The focus is not just on the external investigation, but on the moment Harry's ghost stops warning Dexter and starts misleading him. By the time Leela blows up the Everglades cabin and erases the one place that proves Dokes was innocent, Dexter isn't adapting to a new reality. He's doubling down on an outdated operating system. Season 2 marks the point where the code can't keep up with Dexter's life, his relationships, or the scale of the consequences. The investigation ends, but the trajectory is set. Every new complication will demand choices Harry never prepared him for. So, what happens when Dexter finally has to improvise without the ghost in the room? This is where the experiment breaks. Harry's code is gone, but Dexter's life keeps expanding, and Season 2 turns that expansion into a pressure cooker that no one could realistically control. To keep this clear, we have to compare it to Season 1. Back then, Dexter faces one primary adversary, Brian. The investigation, the personal stakes, the psychological games, all converge on a single figure. It's horrifying, but it's focused. By Season 2, that focus shatters. Instead of one enemy, Dexter is juggling an FBI task force, Dokes breathing down his neck, Leela weaponizing his secrets, and a family life that is already cracking under the strain. Look at the domains. Work is no longer a safe stage where he performs normalcy and harvests data for his next plan. It's the epicenter of the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, the very case built from his own ocean dumps and bloodslide trophies. Home used to be his emotional alibi with Rita and the kids, a place where the mask could rest. Now it's a minefield of trust exercises, NA meetings, and relationship ultimatums. And the secret life, the killing itself, stops being a controlled ritual and turns into frantic damage control. Think about the day his bloodslide box disappears. At work, he has to stand in the briefing room while Lundy uses his trophies as the foundation for a serial killer profile. Moments later, he's dodging Dokes' stare, improvising explanations for every odd movement. Then he goes home and tries to reassure Rita that NA is working, that he's honest now. Within hours, he's in the shipping container with Dokes, teetering between murder and confession. One man. One day. 4 incompatible roles. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that pattern, the rapid pivots that make failure statistically inevitable. When Dexter is sneaking out to the Everglades cabin to feed and frame Dokes, he's also expected to be present for Deb, who is falling for Lundy and needs a brother, not a ghost. While the FBI tightens their body dump grid, Dexter is losing nights to Leela's chaos, fires, and sex, then dragging himself into the lab on no sleep to process evidence that could kill him. Sleep deprivation matters. Emotional strain matters. Constant hypervigilance corrodes the meticulous planning he worships. We watch him misplace tools, rush crime scenes, skip steps in his own code. How long can someone live in that state before a mask slips, a story contradicts itself, a forensic detail gets missed? The central question isn't, why is Dexter so unlucky in Season 2? The focus is not just on bad breaks. It's structural overload. Too many investigations, too many lies, too many people demanding authenticity from a man who has none to give. Along the way, Season 2 quietly proves that Dexter's double life isn't sustainable. It's a slow-motion collapse, waiting for one more bad day. And that bad day is coming. And that bad day is coming. Season 2 lines up the dominoes, but Dexter doesn't just stand in the middle of the blast radius. He keeps nudging the pieces closer together because he cannot see other people clearly. His greatest serial liability isn't a stray fiber or a camera he missed, it's his psychology. To keep this clear, we can track Season 2 through a series of misreads. Over and over, Dexter assumes he understands someone's limits, their intelligence, their motives. Over and over, the investigation and his personal life prove him wrong. The central question isn't will they catch him, it's how many times can he misjudge a human being before his entire plan collapses. Start with Dokes. Dexter treats him as an irritant, not an equal threat. He assumes Dokes will eventually back off, that the man's rage will burn out or be redirected by official orders. Instead, Dokes does the opposite of what Dexter predicts. He follows him to the docks, tails him to the cabin, steals the blood slide box. The moment those slides glint in Dokes' hands, Dexter's belief that he's operating on a higher intellectual plane disintegrates. Dokes doesn't need the code or fancy forensics. He just needs relentless persistence. Then there's Leela. Dexter thinks he's using her. A convenient NA sponsor, a cover story, an outlet for the chaos of the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. He misreads obsession as bohemian intensity, manipulation as understanding. His internal narration confidently assumes she'll stay in the box he's drawn for her. Exciting, disposable, ignorant. Instead, she follows the threads, discovers Dokes, burns the cabin, and literally rewrites the narrative of who the butcher is. Dexter never plans for irrational devotion. He doesn't plan for someone who finds his darkness and wants more. Rita is another blind spot. Dexter assumes the NA lie will function like all his other masks, plausible, boring, accepted. He predicts her reaction in advance, tells us she'll be grateful he's seeking help. But Rita is under her own pressure, from Paul's death, from her children, from years of addiction fallout. Her response is angrier, more suspicious, more emotionally intelligent than Dexter expects. That gap forces him into deeper lies, more elaborate performances, and a trajectory where every attempt at control creates new instability at home. Even Lundy gets underestimated. Dexter treats him as a distant, methodical hunter who will follow the obvious evidence trail straight to Dokes and stop there. Yet we watch Lundy quietly question the fit, sense the off notes, and circle closer to Dexter's orbit than Dexter ever anticipates. In a season where the whole city is vibrating with fear, grief, and scrutiny, assuming anyone will behave rationally is itself irrational. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this blind spot because it's the hidden flaw that turns every clever move into a potential disaster. And if misreading people almost destroys him in Season 2, what happens once the people he misreads start loving him back? So when the people he misreads start loving him back, Season 2 turns into a loop of near disasters wearing different masks. From Dokes at the air conditioner, to Leela at the cabin, to Lundy at the evidence board, we keep watching the same pattern in new costumes. To keep this clear, let's kick things off with the blood slides. Dexter overextends by keeping his entire ritual history in one box inside his own apartment in the middle of an active Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. Dokes follows his instincts, breaks in, and finds the trophies. Evidence surfaces. On paper, that should be the collapse. Instead, everyone around Dexter misreads it. The slides don't prove Dexter is the butcher. They prove Dokes is obsessed and dirty. So the whole machine redirects and swallows the wrong man. We see the same trajectory in the Everglades. Dexter drags Dokes to the cabin, tries to manage this problem the way he manages everyone. Isolate, contain, control. He overextends again, juggling the hostage, the FBI pressure, and his fragile cover with Rita and Deb. Leela follows him, snoops, and uncovers the truth. Evidence surfaces in the form of Dokes in a cage and gasoline on the floor. Once more, the ally-enemy line blurs. Leela's arson doesn't expose Dexter. It erases the only physical proof that he wasn't the Bay Harbor butcher. Emotionally, these scenes all hit the same arc. Initial panic, the slides are gone, Dokes is missing, Leela knows. Short sentence, short sentence. Then the longer rationalization kicks in, where Dexter tells himself he can improvise, that Harry's code still applies if he just bends it one more time. Finally, he exploits someone else's flaw. Dokes' temper, Leela's addiction to drama, Lundy's confidence in his own profile. The central question stops being, what did I do? And becomes, how can I ride their mistakes to safety? And that's the darker psychology underneath the pattern. Dexter's survival in this season doesn't just come from meticulous planning, it comes from a dependence on external chaos and human error. He needs Dokes to break procedure, Leela to torch the cabin, the task force to accept a neat resolution. The focus is not just on Dexter outsmarting the investigation, but on the investigation repeatedly choosing the most convenient story over the true one. Along the way, each escape rewires him. Every time the worst almost happens and then doesn't, he learns the wrong lesson, that he can survive anything. The consequences are subtle at first. More lies to Rita, more secrets from Deb, more confidence that the NA cover story and the Reformed Act will always hold. But morally, the cost spikes. He lets an innocent man's reputation burn. He weaponizes Leela's obsession. He watches colleagues celebrate a victory built on a corpse in the wrong narrative. By the time the season ends, it's clear we haven't watched isolated incidents. We've watched a loop, overreach, pursuit, exposure, miraculous misinterpretation. Each major section of Season 2 is another lap around that track, with the walls closing in, the speed increasing, and Dexter convinced that as long as he keeps running, the edge will never actually arrive. And in the middle of that endless sprint, one figure refuses to join the loop. Dokes doesn't chase Dexter's illusion of control. He stares straight through it. Let's kick things off by remembering who Dokes actually is, beneath the glare and the threats. Former Special Forces. A man who is killed, who will absolutely break bones in an alley, but who is anchored by a blunt, almost brutal commitment to truth. When he bends rules in an investigation, it's to get closer to what really happened, not to protect his ego. Dexter hides violence behind a code, Dokes drags violence into the light and demands it answer for itself. To keep this clear, both men are weapons. The difference is trajectory. Dexter is pointed inward, obsessed with maintaining his plan, his cover, his narrative that he is controlling the monster. Dokes is pointed outward, toward accountability. He doesn't need blood slides or dump site grids to know something is wrong. He reads Dexter's stillness, his fake small talk, the dead eyes at crime scenes. That instinctive recognition is a kind of emotional intelligence Dexter completely lacks about himself. From the moment Dokes tells Dexter, "I see you," the season shifts. No one else in Miami is actually looking at Dexter as a person. They're looking at a role. Forensic nerd, good coworker, reliable brother. Dokes is the only one running a psychological investigation. He intuits what the FBI's ocean current models only later confirm. There is a hunter standing in the middle of this pattern. And then the cabin happens. The man who has been right about Dexter from day one ends up chained in a remote room, forced into the role of future victim in Dexter's kill plan. Those conversations are the real trial of Season 2. Dokes calls out every rationalization, the code, the language of deserving it, the fantasy that Dexter is saving lives. He talks about families, about the people left behind, about the human cost Dexter edits out of his psychology to keep functioning. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that dynamic. The one honest mirror Dexter ever has is the one he keeps trying to smash. Do we notice how rattled he is when Dokes refuses to accept the code as moral? How close he comes to admitting that Harry built a permission slip, not a conscience? The tragedy is almost unbearable. The only character who truly sees Dexter as he is becomes the official monster, while Dexter walks away as the grieving colleague. Leela burns the cabin, the evidence collapses into ash, and the world writes Bay Harbor Butcher over Dokes' face. The focus is not just on the framing, it's on the existential failure underneath. Dexter's survival in this season is literally constructed on the destruction of his clearest reflection. From this point on, every time Dexter claims to understand himself, we have to remember the man he silenced to keep that illusion intact. Because if the mirror had lived, could the myth of control have survived? If Dokes is the mirror Dexter smashes, Leela is the funhouse mirror he's tempted to live inside. One man reflects what Dexter actually is. One woman reflects what he wishes his darkness could mean. Leela walks into season 2 like an answer to a question Dexter has never dared to ask out loud. What if the problem isn't the urge, but the shame around it? She reframes his compulsion as authenticity, his violence as a refusal to be numbed by suburbia and fluorescent office lights, where Harry built a code to contain the monster. Leela leans in and whispers that the monster is the only honest part of him. To keep this clear, look at the NA meetings. Dexter tries to translate his kills into the language of fiction, half-truths about urges and control. Leela doesn't flinch. She pushes him to stop managing and start feeling, to stop hiding and live in the moment. When he confesses pieces of his darkness, she doesn't recoil. She smiles, touches his arm, sets his relapse on fire, and calls it freedom. For someone who has spent a lifetime as the quiet forensic tech in the corner, that is intoxicating. Because for the first time, someone seems to accept the urge without judgment. No lectures, no rules, no investigation into whether it's right or wrong. Just this fantasy of unconditional acceptance. You are what you are, and that's beautiful. Isn't that the central question Dexter has been circling since childhood? Am I a monster, or am I allowed to exist? Leela offers a third option. You're a monster, and that's exactly why I love you. But here's where the psychology of it turns. Leela is not just permissive. She's amoral. She lies, stalks, breaks into Rita's house, and eventually burns down the Everglades cabin with Dokes inside. No code, no criteria, no line she won't cross if it protects the connection she thinks she has with Dexter. In her hands, the logic of Harry's experiment is stripped of its last moral pretenses. If the urge is the only real thing, then anything done in service of that urge is justified. We watch Dexter teeter on that edge. When he lets Leela cover for him with the FBI, when he sleeps with her right after Rita throws him out, when he stands in that art loft basking in the idea that someone finally sees him, he is momentarily beyond morality and consequence. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation is closing in. Dokes is caged in a shipping container. And yet, Dexter is flirting with the trajectory Leela represents. Stop pretending to care. Stop pretending the code is anything but a story. Leela, in other words, is the dark reflection of his master plan. She doesn't just show him how he could get caught. She shows him who he becomes if he stops needing a reason. And once we've seen that reflection, we have to ask, when the next crisis hits, will Dexter choose the code or the freedom Leela promised? And that question drops us right back into the people Dexter keeps insisting he's doing all of this for. Because if Leela is the fantasy of no consequences, Rita and Deb are the opposite. the daily proof that consequences would be unbearable. Let's kick things off with Rita. A modest house, kids' toys on the floor, pancake breakfasts, and movie nights. On the surface, it's the safest, most boring plan Dexter has ever had. Be a good boyfriend, then a good partner, then a good father. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that living room, because it's not just set dressing, it's his alibi made flesh. Rita represents domestic normalcy, routine, the fantasy that Dexter can be permanently in control as long as he keeps showing up for homework and date night. Every time he tucks Cody in or promises Aster he'll be there, he's not just soothing them. He's reinforcing his own story that the code is compatible with family life. The central question becomes, if he really is a monster, what does that make the woman and children who love him? Deb is different. Deb is not the fantasy. She's the emotional anchor. She swears, she spirals, she doubts herself constantly, but she does not doubt Dexter. Her belief in him is so fierce, it functions like armor. When the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation heats up and the slides are found in Dexter's air conditioner, Deb's brain never even opens the file where Dexter as a suspect could live. That absence is its own kind of protection. To keep this clear, Rita keeps him looking human, Deb keeps him feeling human. And that double tether cuts both ways. Because Dexter doesn't want to hurt them, he becomes more cautious about the operational side of his killings. He breaks up with Leela. He tries to quit cold turkey. He leans on the Narcotics Anonymous cover story to explain his disappearances instead of just vanishing. On paper, that looks like progress. But look at the trajectory. The NA lie gives him a flexible excuse, which also hands Leela leverage. His fear of losing Rita after the addiction confession pushes him into more elaborate stories, more late-night damage control. His desperation not to shatter Deb, already traumatized from the ice truck killer, is exactly why he can't admit how close Dokes is. The psychology here is brutal. The more he cares, the more intricate the deception has to become. We see their love literally shield him. Rita defends his strange behavior as recovery struggles. Deb snaps at colleagues who side-eye Dexter during the Bay Harbor Butcher panic, even as the FBI's body dump grid and forensic evidence close in. The people closest to him refuse to ask the one question that would collapse everything. That's why Rita and Deb are the emotional core of Season 2's tension. They're not just collateral, they're the stakes. If the mask slips, it's their lives that detonate first. And as the investigation tightens, we start to see what happens when that protective love is forced right up against undeniable proof. That's the tension we carry straight into the final image of Season 2, Dexter Morgan. Not in handcuffs or a body bag, but at a sunny party, drink in hand, surrounded by people who would have died if the investigation had done its job. The case is closed. The Bay Harbor Butcher file is stamped, boxed, and shelved with James Dokes' name burned into it forever. The FBI packs up. Miami Metro moves on. Leela is a corpse in a Paris loft, erased off screen the second she stops being useful. Dexter drifts back into his routines, school events with Rita's kids, quiet moments with Rita herself, Deb nearby trying to rebuild a life out of the wreckage. On the surface, this is the reset the show promises. The monster redomesticated. The double life back under control. But to keep this clear, we have to overlay that cheerful stability with the invisible ledger this season has been writing. For Dexter to be smiling at that party, a colleague had to be framed as a serial killer and blown up in a cabin. An entire FBI investigation had to misread forensic evidence that Dexter himself understood perfectly. Leela had to commit arson, murder, and attempted filicide in the name of protecting his secret. The code was bent, then broken. then outsourced to someone with no code at all. In his closing narration, Dexter talks about balance, about accepting both sides of himself, about learning that he can live with who he is. He sounds calm, philosophical, in control, but we've just watched a season where every major plan he made failed, where improvisation and other people's crimes did more to save him than any meticulous ritual. The central question hanging over that final smile is simple. What, exactly, has he earned here? He hasn't grown into a more ethical killer. He's discovered that the worst-case scenario can play out almost to the endgame, and he can still walk away if the narrative tilts his way. Harry's code was supposed to be the safeguard against that psychology, the thing that made exposure unthinkable. Instead, Dexter has crossed lines Harry never imagined, letting an innocent man carry his sins, allowing Leela to clean up his mess with more bodies, accepting that the consequences can fall on anyone but him. So when we see him back with Rita and Deb, we're not watching a man restored. We're watching a man who just survived a full dress rehearsal for collapse and learned the wrong lesson. If he can glide through an FBI dragnet and a colleague's execution, what could possibly scare him now? Season 2 doesn't reset Dexter. It warps his trajectory, hardens his belief that he can manage the chaos. And along the way, it quietly sets the stage for later seasons where those same patterns of control, failure, and escape won't leave everyone else standing. Season 2 leaves Dexter walking out of a crime scene he created, reputation intact, enemies erased. On paper, that looks like mastery. But when we trace the investigation beat by beat, the central question shifts. Was Dexter ever actually in control here, or did chaos just keep breaking in his favor? Let's kick things off with the blood slides. Dokes finds Dexter's entire trophy box, the purest expression of his code, sitting in an air conditioner like a signed confession. That discovery isn't the result of Dexter's plan, it's a complete failure of operational control. From that moment on, every escape hinges on other people misreading what's right in front of them. Miami Metro, the FBI, even LaGuerta, all accept the narrative that Dokes is the Bay Harbor Butcher because it's easier, cleaner, less psychologically disruptive than admitting the quiet blood guy is the monster. To keep this clear, think about the big wins Dexter claims this season. Framing Dokes, managing Leela, guiding the task force away from him. In Dexter's internal monologue, he's steering the trajectory of the entire investigation. In reality, he's constantly reacting. Dokes catches him at the cabin. Dexter's attempt to kill him in the Everglades collapses when he can't go through with it and gets locked in the cage instead. That's not a controlled plan. That's his code jamming the brakes at the worst possible moment. Then Leela walks in as a wild card the code never accounted for. She discovers the truth, steals the GPS records, burns down the cabin with Dokes inside. Dexter narrates this as if he's maneuvered a dangerous pawn off the board. But he didn't orchestrate the explosion that neatly destroys the only physical proof of his innocence. Leela did, for her own twisted reasons. The focus is not just on what Dexter wants to happen, but on how often someone else's obsession, blindness, or impulse crime conveniently bails him out. Psychologically, he can't admit that. If he's not the architect, then he's just a passenger strapped to a runaway investigation. So he rewrites everything as intention. The FBI's ocean current analysis closes in. He tells himself he's guiding Lundy. His NA cover story implodes under pressure with Rita and Deb. He reframes the emotional fallout as collateral damage in a necessary plan. The illusion of control becomes a coping mechanism, a story he tells himself so the random, lethal consequences of his life feel like strategy instead of accident. And that gap between narration and reality is where season 2 gets genuinely horrifying. Externally, Dexter survives because Dokes trusts the wrong people, Leela torches the truth, and an entire department chooses the simpler suspect. Internally, he files it all under proof that the code works. If this is what it looks like when he's not really in control, what happens in later seasons when he believes his mastery is unshakable and the people around him stop being so lucky? Season 2 answers that question with a quieter, more unnerving possibility. Maybe he only survives because no one asks the next thing. Not the big cinematic accusation, just the boring, procedural follow-up. The extra why that his entire mask cannot withstand. Let's kick things off with the blood slides in the act. Concrete image first. Masuka's techs pulling a hidden box from Dexter's vent, those glass rectangles glinting under lab lights, Batista and Lagerta realizing they've just found the Bay Harbor Butcher's signature trophies. To keep this clear, the investigation does exactly what it's designed to do. It treats the slides as evidence, not as a psychological confession. They get bagged, logged, and then gravity tilts toward Dokes. But imagine one extra question. Why does the mild-mannered blood guy have a secret, climate-controlled trophy box in his office wall? Why is the only person who knew this ACK unit was failing also the person who processes every BHB crime scene? That's not a plot hole. That's the horror. The system narrows its gaze to chain of custody and opportunity, and Dexter lives in the blind spot where motive, habit, and access overlap. The cabin in the Everglades is the same pattern in the wild. A shack, a cage, duct tape, plastic, Dokes bleeding and begging. The central question practically screams from the scene. Whose plan is this? Whose psychology does this ritual belong to? If a ranger had checked a noise complaint, if a hunter had tracked a boar too far, if a bored tourist with a drone had flown over that clearing one afternoon, the entire Bay Harbor Butcher narrative collapses before Leela ever arrives. Even with Leela, one more question detonates Dexter's control. What if she calls the police instead of her obsession? What if she hands them a living witness instead of a scorched crime scene? The explosion doesn't just burn Dokes. It incinerates the only physical proof that Dexter wasn't the butcher by making Dexter's setup permanent history. Then we have Lundy's grid, that cold, clinical map of bodies and currents. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to how often institutions almost catch up to Dexter's trajectory. Here, the FBI literally draws his hunting ground. The focus is not just on the ocean dumps, but on how comfortably Dexter stands inside that task force, offering expertise. One more question from Lundy, who on this team knows these tides this well, who has been at nearly every scene, who keeps volunteering ocean knowledge no one asked for, and suddenly the brilliant profiler is looking inward instead of outward. And at home, the questions that never get asked are even simpler. Rita could follow him after a late-night NA meeting. Deb could sit in the parking lot and see that no one named Leela shows up. Either of them could say, "Walk me through what you share in there," and refuse to accept the vague, recovery-scented answers. Each major section will show that Dexter's greatest safeguard isn't the code, or the plastic, or the meticulous plan. It's the social habit of not pushing too hard when someone gives a plausible story. Along the way, Season 2 trains us to feel how fragile that habit is. One extra question at work, in the woods, or at the dinner table, and the double life doesn't just crack, it shatters. Season 2 shows us how thin the barrier really is. One more question, one less coincidence, and Dexter is done. What makes it even more unsettling is that the show doesn't abandon this structure after the Bay Harbor Butcher arc. It reuses it. It escalates it. To keep this clear, think of Season 2 as the template. Operational exposure, Relational entanglement, existential crisis around the code. The blood slides in the air conditioner, Dokes in the cage, Leela with the gasoline can. Each one maps to a later echo. Trinity is the cleanest example. Dexter builds a family fantasy around a serial killer who already has a family, and the same three layers collapse at once. Operationally, Trinity's investigation overlaps Dexter's, putting him on Kyle Butler's trail and into official databases. Relationally, Dexter's pursuit drags Rita and the kids into Arthur Mitchell's orbit. Existentially, Trinity forces Dexter to confront the central question. Is the code actually protecting anyone, or just delaying the inevitable body in Dexter's own bathtub? Hannah is a Leela-style dark reflection, pressed into a more intimate space. In Season 2, Leela weaponizes the NA cover story and the Bay Harbor chaos to attach herself to Dexter. Then, literally erases the one man who truly saw him by blowing up Dokes' prison. In Season 7, Hannah does the same thing with a different aesthetic. She slides into his investigation as a target, becomes an accomplice, then a lover, and starts quietly editing Dexter's world with poison instead of fire. The focus is not just on the romance. It's on how Dexter once again confuses being understood with being safe, and once again lets someone who mirrors his psychology hold leverage over his secret. Even New Blood is built on the Season 2 chassis. Iron Lake's small-town investigation is Lundy's task force in miniature. A methodical outsider, Angela, pieces together bodies, patterns, and missing men, while Dexter hides in plain sight under another carefully constructed identity. We get the same triad: operational failure when he slips on basic forensics and leaves a trail; relational failure as Harrison becomes both accomplice and witness; existential failure as the code is exposed as a story Dexter tells himself, not a moral law. Each major section will show that as the series moves forward, the margin for error shrinks. Season 2 lets Dexter survive because Leela intervenes and the system wants a neat suspect. By the time we reach LaGuerta in the shipping container, or Angela with the Bay Harbor file on her laptop, those escape hatches are almost gone. The same patterns repeat, but the consequences sharpen. Along the way, Season 2 stands as the first real puncture of the myth of control. Dexter walks out of it convinced he beat the investigation, protected Deb, and preserved the code. We walk out of it seeing something different, a man who learned the wrong lesson. And once you recognize that pattern here, you can't unsee how every later attempt to reinvent himself is just another Season 2 waiting to collapse. The next phase of the essay will slow down inside that template and track, case by case, how those failures evolve. Season 2 doesn't just give us a tense investigation. It quietly answers the central question of the entire series. What happens when a life built on control is actually held together by failure, coincidence, and other people's pain? From the stolen blood slide box to Dokes locked in that sweltering shipping container, we watch Dexter's system buckle in real time. His trophies get pulled from his air conditioner. The FBI body dump grid traces the Bay Harbor butcher straight back to his ocean. His NA cover story with Leela spins out into obsession and blackmail. Every safeguard we were told to trust, the job, the ritual, the code, gets exposed as fragile. And yet, somehow, he walks away. To keep this clear, Season 2 resolves not through Dexter's competence, but through a chain of desperate patches. Dokes is right about him, but gets framed. Leela discovers the truth, but turns it into leverage and then a convenient explosion in the Everglades. The cabin fire erases the only proof that Dokes wasn't the butcher, perfectly aligning with the FBI's narrative. Deb stands by Dexter because she never sees the full picture. Again and again, survival depends on other people misreading the evidence, misplacing their trust, or literally dying for his secret. So we have to ask, can any amount of adaptation really stabilize a life that requires this many moving parts to stay misaligned forever? Dexter keeps tweaking his plan. New lies, new covers, new versions of the code, but the underlying psychology never changes. He still believes that with just one more adjustment, one more relocation, he can outrun the consequences that have been stacking since those first blood slides. In this video, we're going to treat everything that comes after as Season 2 echoing forward. Dexter trying to quit with Rita. Dexter reinventing himself with Miguel and Lumen. Dexter escaping to Oregon, then resurfacing in Iron Lake. Each major section will show a man replaying the same denial we see in the aftermath of the Bay Harbor Butcher case, the belief that because he survived, the design must be sound. But Season 2 already tells us the truth. The focus is not just on the investigation closing or the case file getting stamped, it's on the cost of that closure. An innocent man's reputation is destroyed. A colleague dies branded as a monster. Leela becomes both accomplice and scapegoat. Dexter's principles warp around each emergency until never kill an innocent becomes never get caught. Those compromises don't reset between seasons. They accumulate. Each near exposure, each framed innocent, each broken rule presses down on his eventual fate like weight on a cracking beam. Once we see Season 2 as a full-scale stress test that he only passes by accident and sacrifice, the long-term trajectory stops looking like a mystery. This can't last. Not logically, not morally, not statistically. The real suspense becomes when the pattern finally stops holding and who gets crushed when it does. Because the next time, Dexter's plans collapse this completely. There won't be a Leela waiting to light the match for him. So when we go back to Season 2, knowing there's no Leela waiting in future seasons to fix the mess, something shifts. The whole thing stops feeling like a close call and starts playing like a dead man walking through a maze that's already on fire. Let's kick things off with the blood slides in the air conditioner. On first watch, that theft feels like a plot jolt. Who took Dexter's trophies? What does it mean? How will he respond? On a rewatch, we already know exactly where they're going, to Doak's gym bag, and the central question changes. It's no longer will Dexter get caught? It becomes, how is everyone not seeing what we're seeing? The investigation is literally built on evidence that only Dexter could have created, yet the narrative bends just enough to let him redirect it. To keep this clear, it helps to track those three categories of failure episode by episode. Operationally, watch how many small choices are already unsustainable. Dexter keeping a full slide box at home, missing that someone has been in his apartment, underestimating how quickly the FBI can map his ocean dumps. Relationally, watch Rita, Deb, and Doak's all reading different fragments of the same collapse, addiction, emotional distance, predatory instinct. Existentially, focus on every time Dexter insists in voiceover that he's in control, even as the camera quietly betrays him. That internal narration is the real rewatch gold. In this video, we're going to lean hard on that gap between what Dexter says and what we actually see. Listen to his calm explanation at the first NA meeting with Leela, the way he frames this as a clever cover story, a new plan to protect the code. Then look at the room, the vulnerability, the way Leela locks onto him. We know she will end up burning evidence, killing Doak's, and nearly killing Rita's kids. That harmless lie is already a live grenade. Then there's the cabin. Those long, tense conversations with Doak's in the Everglades. Dexter rehearsing justifications, while Doak's keeps hammering the same point. This isn't a code, it's murder. Rewatch those scenes as a debate Dexter loses in real time. He can't kill Doak's cleanly. He can't free him without exposure. he can't keep him forever. Every path is a failure state. When the explosion finally hits, it doesn't feel like a twist. It feels like the only way out of a plan that was broken the second he dragged Dokes there. And by the time we reach the Everglades fireball, the season's trajectory has transformed. What once played as thriller now feels like a slow-motion car crash. The focus is not just on whether Dexter escapes, but on how much of his psychology he has to burn to walk away. Because when we move into the next phase of his life, we'll see that Season 2 didn't resolve his double life. It just taught him the wrong lesson about how far he can push it before everything collapses again. Season 2 doesn't just raise the stakes, it should have ended the game. From blood slides in an air conditioner to a cabin exploding in the Everglades, Dexter's double life is hanging by threads he didn't weave and can't really control. To keep this clear, we can track his survival through 4 brutal factors. First, Dokes gets framed by Dexter's own trophies. The investigation finds that wooden box in Dexter's apartment, the exact blood slide pattern that defines the Bay Harbor Butcher. By any rational standard, this is the moment the plan collapses. Dexter's ritual, his proud forensic precision, turns into the prosecution's dream. The only reason it doesn't end him is that Dokes has already been painted as volatile, secretive, and violent. Institutional confirmation bias does the rest. They don't ask, who had the access and the psychology to make these slides? They ask, which problem child already fits our fear? Second, Leela turns into a human deus ex machina. She learns about the code, the killings, the cabin. She walks into the one place that could clear Dokes and condemn Dexter, and decides to burn it all down. Literally, that explosion doesn't just kill Dokes, it vaporizes the last physical proof that Dexter is the real Bay Harbor Butcher. The central question here is simple. What did Dexter actually plan? He locked Dokes up. He stalled. He fantasized about a clean solution. But the thing that saves him is an arson he neither ordered nor anticipated, carried out by a woman whose entire trajectory he has misread. Along the way, Dexter's own tactical intelligence keeps him barely ahead of the formal investigation. He anticipates the FBI's ocean current analysis, shifts his dumping pattern, manipulates the NA cover story to explain his erratic behavior. He's not stupid. He improvises well. But Season 2 exposes the gap between being clever in the moment and being in control of the board. Every time he patches one leak, someone else's choice blows a hole in the hull. The moral cost of that survival is staggering. Dokes dies caged and disgraced, officially branded the monster Dexter actually is. Leela, who saved him by committing murder and arson, becomes another body he has to eliminate. Rita is gaslit through relapse stories and half-truths. Deb is dragged through the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, then forced to accept a narrative that buries the one cop who was right. The case closes neatly on the wrong man, with Miami Metro congratulating itself on a job well done. And Dexter walks away. He watches the wreckage of Season 2 recede in his rearview mirror and draws exactly the wrong lesson. Not that his plan nearly failed, not that his control is an illusion, but that the darkness can be managed if he's just a little smarter next time. That quiet, confident walk into Season 3 is the real cliffhanger, because we now know how fragile that confidence actually is. That quiet, confident walk into Season 3 is not just Dexter's delusion, it's our temptation. Because by the end of Season 2, most of us are doing something very strange. We're relieved he got away. Let's kick things off by admitting the uncomfortable truth. We know Dokes is the only person in that entire investigation who's actually right about Dexter. We've watched Leela burn the Everglades cabin, erase the one place that proves Dokes is innocent, and still, somewhere in us. There's a flicker of satisfaction that the Bay Harbor butcher case is solved. Why? How did we end up rooting for the plan that rewards the killer and buries the truth? To keep this clear, Season 2 is not subtle about the collateral damage. Dokes is caged, framed, and blown up. Leela kills an innocent man in the cabin to protect Dexter's secret. The FBI builds a body dump grid that should point straight back to Dexter's forensic work, yet the collapse of their logic lands on the wrong suspect. Innocent people pay the price, and the real monster goes home to Rita and the kids. The focus is not just on his survival, but on who has to die for that survival to feel earned to us. This is where the psychology of control fantasies kicks in. Dexter believes he can manage chaos, keep the blood slides hidden, juggle the NA cover story with Leela, manipulate Rita, and dance around Lundy's investigation without consequences. And along the way, we project. Who hasn't secretly believed they could run a double life better, keep every secret compartmentalized, stay one step ahead of exposure? Dexter's illusion of control becomes our vicarious fantasy that the right plan, the right code, can keep our darkness quarantined. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to how the show invites that identification. The internal monologue, the dry commentary during the manhunt, the way we experience Lundy's task force from inside the killer's head. When Dexter panics over the stolen blood slide box, it feels like our close call. When he botches the attempt to kill Dokes in the shipping container, we feel the failure as a shared mistake in strategy, not as a near miss for justice. The structure makes Dexter's investigation into himself the primary mystery we care about. That's why Season 2 is such a moral trap. We enjoy the tension of the net tightening, but every time it loosens, someone else gets punished. Dokes, the burned body in the cabin, even Deb, emotionally wrecked by a case that's been rigged from the start. The central question isn't just will Dexter get caught, it's why do we feel bad when he almost does? If that makes us uneasy, that's the point. Season 2 is about the lies Dexter tells himself to keep going, but it's also about the lies we accept to keep watching. And as his trajectory moves into Season 3 and beyond, those lies are about to get much harder to maintain. So now we turn the lens back on us. If Season 2 is about the lies Dexter tells to keep going, the central question for this part is simple. At what exact moment do we think those lies should have shattered for everyone else? Not when did it almost happen, but precisely where. In this investigation, Dexter's double life, realistically, should have collapsed. One scene, one choice, one piece of evidence that no amount of charm, forensics jargon, or NA cover story psychology could plausibly explain away. To keep this clear, let's walk through a few pressure points. First, the blood slides in the air conditioner. We watch Lundy's task force pull out the little wooden box, the glass glinting under fluorescent light, and the entire plan Harry built around trophies and ritual is suddenly sitting on an evidence table. These are the exact markers that define the Bay Harbor butcher. Dexter collected them. Dokes never did. For you, is that already game over? Or maybe your line is Dokes in chains at the Everglades cabin, a decorated cop, the only one whose instincts have been right since Season 1, literally imprisoned by the man he's been hunting. Dexter has to improvise meals, excuses, and timelines just to keep the cage from becoming a confession. At what point, if you were in that cabin, would you stop believing anything Dexter said about control or the code and start calling it what it is, a serial killer cornered by his own failure? Then there's Leela. She finds the cabin. She sees Dokes. She hears the truth Dexter has been hiding from everyone else, and instead of recoiling, she weaponizes it. When she burns that cabin down, she doesn't just erase a body. She erases the only physical proof that Dexter wasn't the Bay Harbor butcher. If you're thinking like an investigator, is that the moment the story becomes too convenient to trust? Pattern interrupt for a second. What if the real breaking point isn't physical evidence at all? What if it's behavior? The FBI grid of ocean dumps narrows the Bay Harbor butcher to Dexter's literal backyard. Leela kidnaps Astor and Cody, forcing Dexter to drop every fade and sprint through Miami as the mask slips. If you were a therapist watching that spiral, which outburst, which lie, which sudden burst of emotion would finally make you say, no, this man is not in control? In this video, we're going to keep tracing those near misses, but now we want your case file. Drop a comment with the specific Season 2 scene where you think Dexter's cover should have blown, and defend it like you're arguing to a jury. Along the way, we'll pull the sharpest breakdowns into future videos and community posts, building a kind of parallel investigation that doesn't let Dexter walk away so clean. Because once we've chosen our moment in Season 2, we can watch how the trajectory into Season 3 twists around it, and how the consequences only get darker from there. Because once we've chosen our moment in Season 2, we can watch how the trajectory into Season 3 twists around it, and how the consequences only get darker from there. So where do we take this investigation next? If Season 2 is Dexter's crash test, the next step is to pry open the dashboard and start labeling every broken wire. That means going character by character, failure by failure, and following each fracture line out into the rest of the series. In this video, we're going to leave Dokes, Leela, and the Bay Harbor cover-up at the edge of survival. But the central question doesn't end with that cabin in the Everglades. It keeps echoing. What actually collapsed here, and what did Dexter wrongly conclude he'd fixed? To keep this clear, the most direct follow-up is a dedicated deep dive into Dokes himself, his instincts, his military background, his refusal to be gaslit by Dexter's mask of control. From the moment he smells something off at Miami Metro to the second he sees those blood slides, Dokes is the one person who reads Dexter's psychology instead of just his paperwork. A full Dokes breakdown lets us ask, if this one man could see through the code, what does that say about everyone else who didn't? And how much of Dexter's survival is competence versus a system that prefers a neat suspect over a messy truth? Along the way, we also need to stay with Leela. A follow-up episode on her isn't just villain appreciation, it's an autopsy of the exact kind of person Dexter's double life attracts. Her manipulation of the NA cover story, her obsession with his darkness, her decision to burn the cabin. Each move is a case study in how his plan to hide in plain sight invites people who want the monster, not the man. Watching Season 2 again with that lens turns Leela from a chaotic fling into a warning sign. If that's the character level, the structural level is a season-by-season breakdown of Dexter's biggest operational mistakes. Each major section will track how the same flaws we've seen here, lazy surveillance, emotional improvisation, magical thinking about the code, keep mutating. From Miguel Prado in Season 3, to Trinity, to Hannah, to Iron Lake. Think of it as a long-form timeline of every time he thought he was tightening control and actually widened the blast radius. So here's the invitation. Rewatch Season 2 with friends, partners, or anyone who still half believes Dexter is a mastermind. Pause at each near exposure, the blood slides in the air conditioner, Dokes in the cage, Leela at the crime scene photos. Ask out loud, whose plan really failed here? Dexter's, or the people who let him walk away? If you want more of these analytical, ominous breakdowns of TV antiheroes whose plans keep collapsing under real-world pressure, subscribe, hit like, and share this with the one person in your group chat who always defends Dexter. The more perspectives we pull in, the sharper this parallel investigation becomes. And then, stay tuned for the long view. In an upcoming video, we'll connect this season's narrow escape directly to Dexter's final fate in New Blood, treating Iron Lake not as a reboot, but as the bill coming due for every shortcut he took here. The focus is not just on how he dies, but on how Season 2 quietly guarantees that ending, years before he ever sees that small town. For now, hold on to one last image. Dexter alone on his boat, the water flat and black under the Miami sky, the Bay Harbor butcher case officially closed. No sirens, no cages, just calm seas and the illusion that the storm has passed. But in this story, calm water isn't safety. It's the eye of the storm, and we're only in the beginning of the damage path.